Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 haunted graveyard horror stories from real life, we descend into the stillness of midnight burial grounds, where every gust of wind sounds like a whisper, and every shadow seems to breathe. These are real accounts from people who swore they'd never set foot near a cemetery again. Stories of graves that move when no one's watching, lanterns that flicker on without a flame, and figures that stand between the tombstones long after the gates are locked. This channel is still growing, and my goal this month is to reach 1,000 subscribers. Nearly 90% of listeners never hit that button. Don't be one of them. Tap subscribe now and step deeper into the dark. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your corner of the night? If there's a graveyard near you that feels wrong, type its name below, because once you walk among these stones, some things will follow you home. Turn off the lights, silence the noise, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I never thought I'd end up guarding the dead, but El Paso rent doesn't care how the night feels. I took the job at Concordia Cemetery because it paid a little better than the strip mall security gigs, and because the hiring manager, a retired cop named Ortega, said the drunks mostly stayed on the other side of the chain link. It's quiet work, he told me during the interview, flipping my application over with one thick finger. Just lock the gates, walk your loops, call if you see lights or smoke. Kids jump the fence to spook each other. That's all. It sounded simple. I'm good at quiet. I'm good at walking and listening. Concordia sits low against the mountain's shoulder, between a freight line and a neighborhood with the kind of dogs that bark tired warnings all night and then give up. On windy evenings, the whole place tastes like dust. Not fresh dust either. Not the good creosote smell after rain, but old chalky grit that sticks to your tongue as if the air has memory. The first night I worked, the horizon still held pink from the west. I watched headlights pull off Alameda and appreciated how the low stones and iron crosses caught the light. A train moaned long and flat. I remember thinking this wasn't so bad. The dead don't throw bottles. They assigned me the late shift 10 to 4. There's usually 2 of us. Whoever drew the short straw with me and makes rounds from the office trailer by the front gate. Plus Manny, the grounds guy, who stays late on the nights when someone's left candles burning. On weekends, we sometimes see volunteers from the Historical Society, mostly seniors. The one I got to know was a woman named Salazar. She kept a small ledger and wrote down any damage we reported, and every time she passed the Chinese section, she'd leave an orange or a few sticks of incense. "It's good to be remembered," she said when I asked. Not everyone here has someone left to remember them. I surprised myself by liking the job. The quiet wasn't empty, it had weight. You heard the desert in it. You heard small things. The way wind clinks the little metal vases people twist onto headstones. The tennis shoe scuff of a teenager trying to impress his girlfriend and then losing his nerve. The dry rustle of a plastic bouquet tumbling end over end. Coyotes kept their distance, but sometimes you'd hear their voices carry from the far lots, thin and tired. Every hour I checked in by radio. "Base, Patrol 2, all clear." The Motorola hissed and popped. Ortega would answer if he was on dispatch, or Luis, my usual partner, would click back from the trailer where he watched a postage stamp set of black and white camera feeds. The weirdness started on a Tuesday. The second week I worked alone in the early hours because Luis had food poisoning. The wind had been steady since 9, one of those nights where it pushed steady as breathing and everything seemed to lean into it. At around midnight, just past the butter-yellow glow of the front lamps, I saw a light bobbing beyond the old miners' plots. Not a flashlight. It wasn't white enough. It looked like a kerosene lantern, rounder, warmer, and too steady in the wind. I stood still a while and waited for it to swing and reveal what hand held it. The light drifted across the far path and then slid into the weeds where there's no road at all. I keyed my radio and said, "Base, do we have anyone in the west lot?" The reply was just Ortega's slow breath and a second of static. "Negative," he said. "You sure it isn't a car on the frontage?" I told him I had eyes on it, no vehicle, no person. "Copy," he said. "Keep your distance." Might be a kid with a lantern app. He didn't laugh when he said it. Ortega's voice never sounded like it was joking, even when I knew he meant to. I walked parallel to the light, keeping one row of graves between us. Twice it slipped behind a cluster of iron fences, and I expected it to show itself again on the other side. It didn't. When I reached the gap where it should have reappeared, there was only a quiet piece of ground, a pale and empty patch like something had just been there, and now was not. I chalked it up to the way the wind played tricks with your eyes. That was the first time. The next time came 3 nights later, and if I'm honest, I'm the reason it kept going. On my second loop, I cut north to check the chain link along the railroad. People push holes under there to bring in cases of beer. I keep a little roll of wire to tie things back up. I was crouched near a mesquite, pulling the fence taut with my glove when my boot scuffed something small and heavy from the gravel. It rolled into the beam of my flashlight and stopped. It was a slug. Lead, misshapen, like a flattened teardrop with chalky gray skin and a faint smear of dirt. I'm no expert, but I've seen enough TV to guess it was an old one. I picked it up because it surprised me to find it there. And because the rule about picking up metal is half keep the ground safe and half we bring in scrap to a bucket in the office. It felt heavier than it looked, and warm in a weird way, like the ground had kept the sun and moved it into the metal. I dropped it into my pocket and finished the tie. People leave bullets at Concordia. They leave whiskey bottles and cigarettes on certain graves. Gunfighters, soldiers, sometimes just old men who liked their smoke. There's one shrine that always gets rounds and coins. I've seen it. I didn't think much of the slug. I did notice the smell, though, when I put it in my pocket. Not powder, not brass. It smelled like old gun oil, the kind you forget in a garage toolbox until it separates and clings to the hinges of things. That smell followed me the rest of the loop. It clung to my hand even after I wiped it on my shirt. Around 2, I passed the Chinese section. It's walled off by a low adobe border that doesn't have a gate, just a half-crumbled lip you step over. The wind usually clears it of paper, but sometimes incense ash makes small drifts by the headstones. That night, before I even reached the wall, I saw prints in the dust, hoof prints, fresh enough that the edges hadn't collapsed, crisp little half-moons moving in a tidy line, only they weren't moving anywhere. They were circling. A neat loop around the Chinese section, hugging the wall as tight as a compass, then blurring and stopping at a place where there is no opening. No gate. The hair on my arms prickled. There aren't horses in the neighborhood. And if someone led one through the main gate for a prank, we would have heard it. I crouched to look closer. The prints had the clean V of a new shoe, sharper than the draggy shape you see on older stock. I followed them with my light slow, and my skin got that stupid too-tight feeling behind my ears. When I came around the far corner, a few prints crossed themselves like whoever had made them paused and shifted weight. Then the pattern just stopped at the north wall. No jump, no scuff. The wind smoothed everything a foot beyond like a new sheet. I keyed my radio again. Base, I've got animal prints by the Chinese section. Horse, I think. Static. Then Ortega. You okay? Yeah, I said. Just odd. They circle the whole section and stop. No gate, maybe kids stamped them. In horseshoes, he said. After a second, he added softer. Don't disturb anything. Just take a photo. I snapped a picture with my phone. Dust glittered like salt. I stepped back and felt something tap my heel. Light like a pebble flicked from a thumb. When I turned, there was no pebble. My pocket felt heavier. The lantern light came back after 3. It was farther out this time, almost at the line of tamarisk by the back fence. Again it moved where there is no road. Again it swung steady against the wind. I told myself it was a trick of the traffic. Headlights bending around a shape or reflecting off the portable toilet we kept for daytime crews. But as I watched, the light slid left and kept moving left until it should have been on top of the chain link. And then it adjusted as if someone had lifted it higher to see over the fence. It paused like that for maybe 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, my radio popped and whistled like someone pressed the transmit button and breathed into it. I heard a tiny metallic sound. A jingle you could almost miss under the wind like spurs kissed together once. The light drifted down. I could taste oil. The next day I told Luis about the prints. He laughed until I showed him the picture. Maybe Manny got himself a cowboy, he said. But when Manny came in with his thermos and his green work jacket, he shook his head hard. No horses, he said. People call me for the dumbest things, but not that. He didn't like the picture. He kept looking at the part where the print stopped by the wall. He put his thumb to the screen and wiped as if the phone were dirty, and the rest of the prints would show up if he rubbed hard enough. I'll rake it, he said after a minute, like the act of raking would undo whatever lay under the top layer. We get visitors at night sometimes. Border Patrol trucks cutting their lights to watch the tracks by the railroad. A nurse who came to leave flowers on her brother's grave on her way home from the late shift. It helps to have other people break the spell of a place. That Friday, Ms. Salazar came for a survey of headstones that needed repair. She wore a windbreaker that flapped when she walked and tied her hair back with a pencil in it. When she reached the Chinese section, she paused and made a little face. "Something's turned," she said, as if she were talking about milk. She stepped over the low wall and put a tangerine down. I told her about the prints. She listened without making a joke of it. "They were treated worse than animals," she said, looking at the row. "When it was bad in town, people tried to burn this area. They built the wall to keep people out, not to keep anyone in." She looked up at the far corner and then at my hands. "Do you smell that?" she asked. I didn't have to ask what, the oil. The wind shifted and brought the scent like someone had cracked a rusted cap under our noses. That same night, around 1, my boot brushed against a metal pier pin half sunk in the path. It made a clean bell-like ring, and maybe it's nothing, but the ring made the hair I didn't have stand up. I slowed my steps. The radio hissed low as if it had turned itself down. The stars had that sharp, unblinking look they get when the air dries out. I took the slug from my pocket and weighed it in my palm. I was getting superstitious about it. It didn't fit with the other junk we put in the scrap bucket. It felt like a thing that had a story before I found it. I decided to leave it where I'd found it, to put it back on the ground near the fence and be done. I told myself that was rational. It wasn't. I felt watched. Not the way you feel watched when teenagers are hiding, but the way you feel watched when somebody older who remembers you from when you were small turns their head and recognizes you in a crowd. The weight of it isn't hostile. It's just precise. I walked out past the miners' plots again, past a cross made from 2 pieces of rebar tied with wire, toward the chain link. The lantern light drifted from the tamarisk. It moved slow, almost politely. I didn't head toward it. I pretended it wasn't there and kept my eyes on the fence. That's when I heard the spurs. Not a jingle like in a movie, a dry tick. A tap-tap the way metal kisses rock. They were behind me, close enough that I felt air move on the back of my neck. I didn't turn. I don't know why that felt like the wrong thing, but it did. The wind went softer, as if something big had stepped between me and it. A man's voice spoke just behind my right shoulder. It wasn't loud. I can't tell you the exact words because they weren't in English, I know. They came across like something worn by time, a Spanish that was older than the one I hear in line at the grocery store, dipped in the cadence of someone who's been dead 100 years and learned to talk without breath. But I knew what he wanted because I felt my hand close around the slug in my pocket without me telling it to. The radio peeped a tiny morse of carrier noise, and under it a calm woman's voice said something like "Devuélvelo." Not in my ear, but inside of it. "Give it back." My face went hot. This is the part where people reading roll their eyes, right? You left a graveyard bullet in your pocket and now the wind's telling you to be a good boy. But believe me or don't, I couldn't breathe the next second. Something in my chest tightened like a strap. I pulled the slug out and set it on my open palm behind me without turning. It rolled forward to the crease of my fingers and then stopped as if someone put a finger to it. The smell of oil grew stronger, mixed with sweat and something like old leather that's been in the sun too long. The spurs took one step closer. I heard a single nick of metal on my flashlight's tail cap where it dangled from my belt. The light at the tamarisk brightened without moving. The strap across my chest eased. I swallowed hard enough to feel it in my ear. The word came again, this time in the English shape of it. Back. I knelt and placed the slug on the ground. For a second it seemed to sink into the gravel like a tiny boat finding a pocket of water. I stood without taking my eyes off the fence. The spurs ticked twice, circling me to face the Chinese section. The wind returned in a single breath, puffing dust across my lips. I turned then because everything in me said it was allowed. No one was there. Just the low wall and the neat white markers beyond it, and a thin line of hoof prints that hadn't been there a minute before, leading from where I had stood to the wall and around. They stopped where they always stopped, at the same northerly spot. The lantern faded like a thought you can't hold. My knees shook the way they do after a long run. I keyed the radio and said too bright, "Base, wind's picking up. I'm heading in to warm my hands." Luis's voice came back gentle. "Copy, you good?" "Yeah," I said. "Cold. You tell yourself not to make a thing out of a thing. You tell yourself the brain is a radio, and it picks up strange stations when you're alone too long." The next evening, I stopped at a convenience store off Piedras on my way in, and bought a small pack of incense, the cheap kind that smells more like candy than temple. I'm not religious. I'm not anything. But I put the sticks on the dashboard, and the smell made the car feel less like mine and more like something patient. Manny raised an eyebrow when he saw them and said, "Working extra shifts?" I said they were for mosquitoes. He shrugged and told me he'd raked the Chinese section. "No more prints," he said. By 10, the wind had dropped. The stars looked lower and there were fewer trains. Around midnight, Ortega came by with coffee like he did once a month when he was restless. He doesn't spook. He's the kind of man who looks at any problem as if it's going to run if he just stares hard enough. I told him about the light and the prints, and he listened like a man listening to weather. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I worked a robbery out here back in '98, he said. "Not in the cemetery, on the street. The guy ran across this ground because he was stupid, and he tripped on one of those iron fences and cut himself. When I cuffed him, he kept saying, 'I gave it back, I gave it back.'" Ortega sipped and looked at the far line of trees. "Sometimes a place wants whole things. People, bullets, words." He put his cup down. "Don't pocket anything from the ground unless you mean to keep it for good." After he left, the night was milder. I made my loops. No light, no spurs. I let my shoulders drop. Around 3, just when your body remembers breakfast doesn't exist and your eyelids feel like they weigh more than your hands, my radio crackled a pattern I knew wasn't ours. 3 short bursts, a gap, then 1 long. Kids with a scanner, I thought. It repeated. On the 3rd repeater, the long tone stayed and turned into something like breath. I turned the volume down. From the direction of the Chinese section, there was a long pause in the wind and then a single horse's exhale the way they do when they lower their head. I don't know how to explain the sound if you haven't heard it. It's like a heavy bag of air being let out through a nose. It has warmth. I buzzed my mic twice to feel less stupid and said, "Bass, you copy a tone from the west side?" Silence. And then, very clearly, a low male voice over my radio said my name. Not my last name from the clipboard. My first name in my mother's old way of saying it, drawn from somewhere that had nothing to do with the men who worked nights. The handset felt hot in my hand. "Who is this?" I asked, and I knew as I asked there wasn't a person on the other end. I lit one of the incense sticks and let it burn down in the gravel by the wall. The smoke went straight up. It smelled too sweet and wrong there, like a kid trying to fix a serious thing with candy. I said out loud, talking like an idiot in the dark, "If I took something that was yours, I'm sorry." I put it back. The wind answered in its usual way, tugging at my jacket. I could feel my heartbeat against my throat. Right then, a border patrol truck rolled by on the frontage, a rectangle of white with a green stripe, and it slowed long enough to make me feel like a person again. The driver lifted a hand off the wheel. I lifted mine. The night went back to its shape. Sometimes you need someone else's lights to tell you the sky is still the sky. I thought that was the end of it. I didn't tell anyone else. Not my sister, who thinks this job will wear my joints out. Not Luis, who would have turned it into a joke and then looked over his shoulder when he got home anyway. Another week passed. A church group came through Saturday morning to clean stones. Kids used trash grabbers to pick up plastic bouquets and broken candles. Ms. Salazar cataloged repairs and told me, without looking at me, that some names ask for more notice than others. "You'll know which ones," she said, and then she laughed it off and asked if we'd seen an orange cat that had started sleeping under her car. Manny painted a little section of fence and whistled off-key. The job took its normal shape again, and the night became what it is when you live with it. Then, 3 nights ago, as I was leaving at 4, I found something on the step by the office trailer. The wind had swept the concrete clean, but there it sat in the center as if placed by a careful hand. Another slug. Not flattened like the first. This one still round enough to make you think it could roll if it had a mind. It looked newer, but the gray was the same old chalky kind that doesn't shine. There was a dirty thumbprint on it. The smell, if you can call something this faint a smell, was there too. Gun oil, warmed by friction and years. I don't own a gun. No one I work with leaves bullets lying around the office. I picked it up and a small shiver went through me like when you step in a cold puddle. I put it on the desk and thought about calling Ortega. Then I waited. I told myself I was waiting to see if whoever put it there would show themselves. I leaned in the doorway. The horizon was turning the color of old peach. No one came. At home, I couldn't sleep past noon. Every time I closed my eyes, the hoofprints circled and circled. A small idea came to me that I didn't want and couldn't shake. Whoever that voice belonged to didn't want his bullet back because it belonged to him like a toy. He wanted it back because a piece of him was in it. The way some people believe in being buried with all your parts? The way my grandmother used to mutter about not throwing away hair after a haircut, because something could find it. Ms. Salazar had said something about whole things. The new slug on the desk sat there, quiet as a coin. I brought the slug back that night. I didn't put it in the scrap bucket. I didn't take it to Manny. I put it in my pocket and walked loops like normal until the air felt clean of other people. Around 1:30, the lantern showed itself again out past the tamarisk. It wasn't a trick of cars or my head. It had the warmth of a flame. I walked toward the Chinese section. The dust there had settled in a skin since Manny's raking. I knelt and placed the slug along the inside of the wall on the north edge, at the spot where the prints always stopped. For the first time, I stepped over the wall. I'm not sure why I hadn't before. It felt like stepping into a room full of sleep. I heard the spurs in the path outside, one step just enough to say I wasn't alone. I pressed the slug into the dust with my finger. My radio clicked softly like someone tapping a ring on the mic. The wind died down to the sound of small, patient breath. I don't know what I expected. A voice, a thank you, a lack of anything. What I got was this, quiet, not empty. Full, like when you turn off a fan and realize how much noise it had been making. The lantern dimmed and slipped back toward the trees where there is no road, and the smell of oil faded so gently that I couldn't tell you the exact second when it left. I stood stepping carefully so I didn't scuff any names, and lifted my foot to cross back over the wall. That's when something brushed the cuff of my jeans, a soft bump like a horse's nose when it asks if you have a treat. I looked down on instinct. There was nothing there to see. The dust held no new print, but the cuff carried two faint smears that weren't there before, like someone had touched me with fingers blackened by soot and sun. I didn't talk about this with anyone the next day. You don't want a story like this because it throws a shadow over your daylight hours, but I'm writing it now because last night proved something, and I can't carry it alone. A little after 2, a pair of teenagers hopped the fence near the railroad and headed straight toward the old gunfighter's grave that always gets coins and cigarettes. I flicked my flashlight at them and told them to come back to the gate. They ran. I cut across, found them at the miner's plot, and did the usual I'm not calling cops speech. They were shaking but trying not to show it. The girl had a little chain in her fist with a tiny horseshoe charm. She kept squeezing it like a rosary. The boy had a bandana pulled up under his nose like that makes you older. We didn't do anything, he said, but his voice broke on the second word. Tell me what you saw, I said, because fear has types, and theirs had the sharp kind that comes from a specific thing that just happened. The girl answered. A light, she said, pointing toward the far fence. Like a lantern. We thought it was you. Then we heard. She stopped and swallowed and looked at the boy. He shook his head, but not to deny, more like, I don't want to say it. We heard spurs, she said anyway, in a small voice. Like in a movie, but not fake. I let them out and told them to go home. They nodded a lot and didn't say anything else. When the gate clicked behind them, I stood there with my key in my hand and looked back across the ground. The lantern moved once and stopped as if to make sure I had seen. It seemed to tilt like a greeting. Then it went. I walked to the Chinese section by habit, my boots finding the familiar path. The dust there was calm. No prints, no circles. The north wall looked like a flap of pale fabric laid down to set it all in place. That should be the end of the story, right? Maybe it is. Maybe some things only need to be made whole once and then they leave you alone. But I don't think that's how it works. Tonight, when I pulled into the lot 10 minutes early, I reached down to grab my thermos from the passenger floor and my fingers closed around something that hadn't been there before. It was another slug, smaller than the others, smooth on one side and rough on the other like it had caught a stone a long time ago and decided to keep the impression. There was no smell. I put it on the dash. I stared at it until my eyes watered. Then I put it back in my pocket because I'm slow to learn. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe Manny found a stash of scrap and is playing with me without knowing it means anything. Maybe the place is returning things to where they can be put right. I'll walk my loops tonight. I'll answer my radio. I'll nod at Border Patrol when they creep by. I'll pass the Chinese section and look at the north wall without getting closer than I need to. If the lantern shows, I'll keep to my path. If the spurs speak, I'll listen and I won't turn too fast. And if a voice at my shoulder asks for the bullet back, I'll give it. I think that's the only rule out there. I think the wind that smells like old gun oil isn't about guns at all. It's about what people take and what places remember. I used to believe your job as a guard was to keep the living people off the dead. Now I think it might be the other way around. Keep the dead from trailing us out to our cars. Keep them from following us home. Keep them from asking, at your doorstep in the hour when birds haven't started, if they can have the small, heavy piece of themselves you didn't know you were carrying. When I lock the gate at 4, the east is a thin, cold line. There's enough light to see the dust. Sometimes there are faint half-moons over by the Chinese section. Most times there aren't. Sometimes stepping into my kitchen an hour later with a plastic bag of breakfast tacos on the counter, I think I hear a single dry tick in the hallway, as if metal kissed tile wants to get my attention. I don't go looking for it. I put whatever I've found back where it belongs. I talk out loud like a coward or like a gentleman. I say not too loud, you can have it. And some mornings there's nothing on the doormat when I open the door, and some mornings there's a little gray weight that wasn't there the night before, and in those moments the house smells faintly like the inside of a shop that closed 100 years ago, where someone forgot to throw out the oil. I hold the weight in my hand and feel the old sun it took and kept, and I remember a voice I don't want to remember asking for one small part to be returned to the whole. I don't know how long this will go on. I don't know if I'll ever see the man who wears those spurs, or the horse whose breath weighs the night. Maybe I already have, and I just learned to stop turning around at the wrong time. What I do know is this: in a place like Concordia where the dust refuses to be new, the ground doesn't forget what it was asked to hold. If you find something there that feels like it belongs to someone else, even if it looks like junk, don't make it yours. If you take it by accident, pay attention to the way the wind smells. If you hear a lamplight moving where no road runs and spurs measure out your next step behind you, don't hurry and don't run. Open your hand, give it back, then keep walking, slow and polite like you're in someone else's house and you've been allowed to stay until the sun comes up. I'm not the kind of person who hunts for haunted places. I drive for a rideshare to keep my bills straight, and I try to keep things boring. If you've ever worked nights, you know the deal. Coffee that tastes like pennies, playlists that blur into one long hum, and a brain that starts inventing faces in the side mirror around 2 in the morning. So I'm not posting this for clicks. I'm posting because something happened on a Thursday night in Redwood City, California, and even after changing my route maps and updating my phone, it's still following me in a way I don't know how to explain. It was late September. The fog had slipped inland from the bay and sat low over El Camino Real like breath on glass. I'd been circling between Menlo Park and San Carlos doing short fares, the kind where the base pay barely covers the gas. A guy from a biotech company had stiffed me on the tip, and a woman who smelled like lavender lotion had asked me 3 times if I was sure I locked the doors. Midnight slid into 1. The air went colder. My stomach told me I was underneath my calorie count, and my phone buzzed with that soft little notification that means another ride, another $5 if I'm lucky. Dispatch pinged me from the app, but in our market there's also a real person after midnight. Her name is Lynn, and she sits in a fluorescent office somewhere near SFO with 4 monitors and a cardigan collection. She's the one who calls when there's a change or a quick manual reroute, and she knows the shortcuts better than my GPS. She's also the one who knows I sometimes cut through the old cemetery on Woodside to shave off lights when the streets are empty and the fog's heavy. It's one of those shortcuts you only try once on a dare, realize it saves 2 minutes, and then it becomes a habit you don't say out loud. At 1:18 a.m., I got a pickup request at an apartment complex east of El Camino near Brewster. The passenger's name was S. The note on the ride said, "Quiet, please." I hit accept and Lynn's number flashed on my dash. "You're close," she said. "Traffic light on Veterans is stuck on red again. If you're comfortable, cut Woodside." She didn't say the cemetery, but she didn't have to. "There's only one Woodside shortcut that saves you when Veterans and Hudson get stubborn." I said, "Yeah, fine," because it was my usual move. And because that part of Redwood City isn't exactly spooky in a Hollywood way. It's small houses with dark windows, a strip of businesses that pretend they're closed by 8, and a cemetery backlit by street lamps and red tail lights. No thunder, no hollow church bells, just the Bay Area deciding to be quiet for once. I picked up S at 1:25 a.m. He was mid-20s, hoodie zipped up, headphones in, the kind of polite where he says thanks, and folds himself into the back seat like he's trying not to take up space. I glanced at him in the mirror and said, "Woodside okay?" He nodded without taking off the headphones, so I took that as a yes. It was a short ride, maybe 10 minutes. We cut west and I slid onto Woodside Road with the fog laying in strips across the pavement. The cemetery fence came up on our right. Black iron with finials like spear points, and beyond it a sloped hill of pale gravestones. I could see the old brick caretaker's building up near the top, yellow light in one window. I've always thought the place doesn't look scary so much as tired, like it's seen enough and wants everyone to let it sleep. My rear camera chirped when we hit a bump near the gate. Just one of those little stabilization beeps. It throws you a dashboard preview, grainy grayscale, and a passenger count overlay that helps in case of disputes. It's not perfect, but it saved me from the "I was never there" argument a couple times. I glanced at it like I always do, mostly from habit. Passengers, one front, one rear, that was normal. Me in front. Kid in back, then the overlay stuttered and flashed. Passengers, one front, two rear. I immediately checked the mirror, because that's what you do when a machine tells you something wrong. There was nobody else back there. Just the kid with his hoodie halfway up and the outline of an empty seat next to him. My brain did that thing where it tries to fix the world. Maybe the seatbelt strap reflects weird. Maybe the headrest looks like a shoulder to the camera. I raised my eyes to the road, slowed a little, and tried not to think about how the fog thickened at the edges of the cemetery like it was holding its breath. I tapped the dash to switch the overlay off. It flipped back on by itself, the way a sticky app sometimes glitches after an update. The number didn't change. Front two rear. I lifted my eyes to the actual mirror again. The mirror showed both back seats occupied. My heart jumped like a drink in a cup holder when you hit a pothole. I looked again, longer this time, because I don't scare easy and I don't jump at shadows. The mirror said there were 2 passengers in the back. The camera feed said there were 2. The world, my world with the fog and the fence and the streetlights painting white bars on the hood, said there was one. I turned down the radio so I could hear tires on pavement. The kid must have felt me go quiet because he took one earbud out. "Everything okay?" he asked, voice small like he didn't want to interrupt. "Yeah," I said. "Just, the camera's acting up." I smiled into the mirror in a way I hoped looked normal, and the mirror showed him and a woman next to him. Not next to him like strangers sit. She was angled just slightly toward him like you do with someone you're traveling with. Her face was turned away from me in that first glance, like she was looking out the window. Long pale hair fell forward over a shoulder. Her hands were folded in her lap. I saw the line of a dress, old-fashioned, high in the neck, like a photograph I'd seen in a museum one time. I slammed the brakes harder than I meant to. The kid jolted forward with a muffled, "Whoa!" The seatbelt caught him. "Seriously?" He was smiling, but the kind of smile that searches your eyes for a reason to stop smiling. "You good?" I swallowed. "Sorry. Cat ran across," I lied, not sure if he could see in the dark that there was no cat. He put his earbud back in, but his eyes stayed on me. I eased the car forward, past the iron gate, past 2 marble angels that looked like they'd been staring at the road since before the highway was a highway. The mirror woman kept her head turned away. She wore something white, a dress or a gown that faded to the color of fog around the edges. She sat so still that for a second I convinced myself she was a trick of reflection, like a hood shadow that lined up with a bright memorial across the lawn. Then she turned her chin by the smallest angle, and I saw cheekbone and the idea of an eye. There are stories in this town. I've never been the guy to collect them, but if you drive enough tipsy college kids and third-shift nurses, you pick up pieces. Union Cemetery, white lady looking for someone she lost. I never knew the details. I still don't. I just knew instantly in the spine and the meat behind the eyes that I didn't want her looking at me straight on. Lynn called again just then, and the sudden ring made my grip jump on the wheel. I didn't answer on the first ring because I was watching the mirror, and the mirror was showing me something that didn't exist in my car. On the second ring, I hit accept on the steering control. "You're going to laugh," she said in my ear. "But I've got a note on the map that your rear camera thinks you've got 3 on board. You're alone, right?" "Passenger plus me," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. The kid looked at my eyes in the mirror again. If he noticed the woman, he gave no sign. "It's glitching." "Probably the fog," Lynn said. "Optical bounce off the fence. There are some reflective plaques along there." She paused. "Hey, don't do the cemetery if it freaks you." "I'm already in it," I said. "Then just go steady. You're almost through." She hesitated. And watch the mirrors. I am, I said before I could stop myself. I hung up because I didn't want to talk anymore. There was a shape in my back seat that was only real in the mirror, and the mirror wanted me to look too long. Like a cartoon where the eyes move if you look at them from the corner. The kid in my car shifted and cleared his throat and said, "Can you go down a block past the pin? My roommate's got a 3D printer going and the smell is..." He trailed off, maybe because he saw that I wasn't quite here with him. "Yeah," I said, "1 block past." The camera chirped again. My dash showed the count, flipped, and stayed there like it was carved. Front 3, rear. I didn't want to check the mirror. My body did it for me anyway. The second face wasn't fully turned, but it had moved. The hair wasn't hanging down as much. The cheek was whiter than the fog. The mouth was small. The eyes were, I can't even tell you, not because they were monstrous, because they were just eyes, but eyes in the wrong place, like you'd moved a painting from one wall to another, and the nail holes didn't line up anymore. I whispered, "Nope," without meaning to. It came out like I was turning down dessert at a dinner. I made the mistake of trying to catch her in peripheral vision, the way you do with things you think might be tricks. So I flicked my gaze from the mirror to the right rear window and back again. In the real world, the window was fog and grave markers and a path cut between plots. In the mirror, the window showed that too, but framed by her shoulder and the fall of her hair. My brain was chewing itself. We reached the far side of the cemetery where the fence dips and the lights get thin. There's a red brick building there, caretaking or storage, with glass that reflects the road like a bad memory. The mirror in my car took that red tinge and threw it across the rear view like someone had breathed on it. And the breath was blood warm. The woman's dress, if it was a dress, picked up that red as if the fibers were thirsty. "Wrong turn?" the kid asked. He leaned forward just a little. Not much, but enough that his shoulder brushed the air where the mirror said someone else was. My stomach went hollow. The mirror woman didn't move. The camera chirped twice like a small bird trapped. "I'm going to pull over," I said, which is not something you say in a cemetery at 1:30 in the morning to a stranger, if you want to be trusted. But I didn't care about etiquette anymore. Something's wrong with my equipment. "There's a lot right now that's wrong," he said, very soft. He was staring into the mirror, too. I had to decide in that second if he saw her. Then he looked down at his phone. "I'm getting extra rider charges." "What?" I snapped, and it came out sharper than I meant. He turned the screen toward me as if I could drive and read at once. It said, "Your driver has 2 additional passengers." Fare adjusted. I felt a splinter of anger slice through the fear, clean and bright. I make so little as it is. The idea that a glitch in a camera could bill him for a ghost made my hands lock on the wheel. "Okay," I said. "We're solving this." There's a turnout right before the fence ends, a patch of asphalt with an old no parking sign nobody honors. I eased into it, put the hazard lights on, and took a breath that didn't help. When I shifted the car into park, the mirror fogged. Not the glass, but the image, like a lens out of focus. The woman's face turned 1 more degree and the red from the brick building skated across her features in a way that made my scalp crawl. If you've ever tried to look at something straight, and your eyes kept sliding off, you know the feeling. Like your body knows ahead of time that you're about to make a mistake. "Don't look at her head on," my brain said. "Don't." "I'm going to step out and reset the camera," I told the kid. "Stay put." He nodded, but he looked like every nerve in his body wanted to leap. "Don't leave me with her," he whispered. So quiet I wouldn't have heard it if the road had any traffic. He had seen her too. Not in the world, his eyes flicked to the mirror. Not the seat next to him, but he saw enough to form the sentence. That's when my fear migrated. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about leaving this kid in the back with something that only showed up where reflections live. "I won't," I said. It sounded brave and false. I killed the engine but left the hazard lights, their red blink cutting across the iron fence. I stepped out into cold air and the damp smell of cut grass and stone. The world was the world. My car, the fence, the slope of headstones with nicked corners. The noise of the city was a far hum, as if it were embarrassed to be heard here. I opened the rear passenger door that should have been empty. The seat sat there with a faint impression in it like someone had just stood up, which made no sense and also made a lot of sense. I leaned in and said, to nothing, "Ma'am, we're not your ride." I don't know why I said it like that. I don't call anyone ma'am. Maybe it's some reflex you find when you're older than the average driver, and there's a shape you don't understand in your car. The smell that came out from the back seat reminded me of a thrift store when it first opens in the morning. Linen and dust, something floral that lost its name a long time ago. The kid was hugging his backpack. His eyes kept flicking to the mirror mounted in the front even from back there, because the mirror was angled to show the rear. "She's closer," he breathed. I didn't want to look. I couldn't not look. I glanced up at the mirror. She was closer. Her face would have been inches from mine if she were in the world. If I had leaned over the center console, we would have bumped foreheads. Her mouth was a small exact line. Her eyes were wrong again, small and far apart like a portrait drawn by someone who had been told how faces worked but had never seen one. And the red wash from the brick window turned her into a photograph left near a heater. "Hey," a voice called from the sidewalk. The beam of a flashlight washed across my windshield and then over my hands. A security guard from somewhere up the block approached with the slow authority of someone who's broken up worse. He was older, heavy in the shoulders, a beanie pulled down over his ears. "You can't park, oh." He took in the hazard lights, my expression, the kid's face. "Everything all right?" "My camera's malfunctioning," I said, which was both true and not. "The app thinks I've got extra passengers." He angled his flashlight toward the interior without being rude. The beam didn't show a woman. It showed a clean seat and an anxious kid. The guard looked at me, then at the mirror. He didn't react like a man who sees a ghost. He reacted like a man who sees someone else see something. "Don't look," he said, kind and plain. "Just don't." "Has this happened?" I asked, because the question leaped out before I could stop it. He lifted one shoulder and made a face that said, "Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe you're making my night more interesting than I want. Just finish your drive," he said. "Take the long way next time." I closed the back door without touching the empty seat. I got in, I started the car. I didn't look at the mirror, which was like telling your tongue not to touch a loose tooth. I pulled out into the slow blink of my own hazard lights, and we rolled past the end of the iron fence and the tidy hedges, and the screen on my dash went back to normal for 2 seconds. Front, one rear. The kid let out a breath that sounded like he'd been underwater. "Thank you," he said, which felt too big for what I'd done, but I took it. "Can you go around the block? 2 more maybe, just, I don't want to get out yet." "Of course," I said. I drove the long rectangle around a neighborhood of sleeping houses, sprinklers ticking in the dark, a dog giving one confused bark that nobody answered. I didn't look in the mirror. I stared at the road and the white paint and the windshield wipers I didn't need. By the time we came back toward his street, he'd put both earbuds in and his hands had settled a little. "You can stop here," he said. I pulled up to the curb. He fumbled for his card and then shoved his phone toward me. "I'm going to dispute the extra rider charge," he said. His voice was more solid now, grounded in a problem you can solve with screenshots. "I know it's not your fault." "Thanks," I said. He opened the door, stood there for a second, and glanced at the mirror one last time. Do you cover these areas often?" he asked, which was not the real question. The real question was, will she be here if I need a ride again? I didn't want to own that, so I said what I could. "Not anymore." He nodded like I'd blessed him. He stepped out and shouldered his bag. He gave a quick wave and skipped up the stoop like a kid 5 years younger racing a dog to the door. I watched him go. Habit tugged my eyes to the mirror. I let them go there because it would be worse to wonder than to know. The mirror showed my backseat empty. Then the overlay ticked, as if someone inside the code cleared their throat. 1 front, 1 rear. I spun around in the seat, because if she was back there still, if she had stayed, I needed to see the air move. Nothing. Seatbelt, headrest, a receipt that had fallen under the floor mat. When I faced forward again, the mirror caught the red blink from a distant traffic light and burned it across the glass like a smear. I called Lynn. "I'm filing a bug," I said. My voice only shook in the first half of the first word. Camera added riders I didn't have. I shut my mouth. I didn't know how to say the thing you can't say without changing your life. It also showed a dead woman. It also put her in my car where she could breathe on me in the rear view and never fog the real glass. "I see the flags," Lynn said. "You're not the only one tonight near Woodside." She paused and the office clack of keys went quiet. "Take a break. You don't have to be a hero." A cop rolled past slowly then, eyes clocking the hazards. He saw me on the phone and lifted his hand. I lifted mine back. Nothing to see. A driver, a call, the long ribbon of night. "I'm going to get coffee," I said. "Then I'll do 3 more and clock out." Make it too, she said. The coffee shop near the tracks was open for the bread delivery. Fluorescent light made my skin look the color of sidewalk chalk. I watched steam lift from the cup and told myself it had been a trick. The mirror had doubled, the fog had refracted, the red brick had painted everything weird, and my brain had done what brains do with faces. When I went back to the car, the interior was exactly what it had always been. Seat cloth that needed vacuuming, the faint crisp smell of the disposable air freshener, Pacific rain that smells like nothing in nature. My phone still sat in its cradle. The app still glowed. The ride request tone pinged. I accepted a woman going to the night shift at Sequoia Hospital. She was in her 50s with hollow eyes and a plastic badge on a clip. She fell asleep before we hit the first turn. At the second turn, my overlay popped. One front, one rear, then one front, two rear. I didn't look. I watched the road. I drove the speed limit. I kept my hands at 10 and 2. I tuned my breath to the sound of her breathing. And when she woke up, I asked if she wanted a different playlist, and she said, "No, please, this is fine." And the overlay didn't change. I kept driving the rest of that week, but I stopped going near the cemetery. I set my route preferences so Woodside West between El Camino and the hill might as well be dropped into the bay. Sometimes the app respects that, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it tells you what you already know. On Sunday afternoon, I drive days now, more families, fewer ghosts. I washed the car at one of those self-serve places off Veterans. Sun bright, hose hissing, soap rainbowing in the puddles. When I wiped the mirror with the chamois, I felt it. Just a temperature difference, a coolness that clung to the glass longer than to the windshield or the side mirrors. People can laugh at that. I know the difference between shade and something else. I put the mirror back in place and sat there with the engine off, listening to a leaf blower across the lot. The overlay stayed off. The mirror showed only me, my hair flattened under a cap, my eyes older than last week. The back seat sat empty, a nap of fabric, a clean seatbelt buckle. I still drive. I still see 3 riders sometimes when there are 2. It isn't constant and it isn't dramatic. It's just one more moving part in a life already full of them. I've got a post-it on my dash now that says "No Woodside" in block letters. It looks like a note you'd make for a grocery list and forget in your other jacket. Every once in a while after midnight, I think about a woman in white and the way red glass can turn a reflection into a warning. Sometimes when I park for the night, I tilt the mirror down so I don't catch my own face coming back. That helps a little. A couple nights ago, I got a ping from the app. "We've resolved a temporary issue affecting rear seat detection." The message had confetti graphics like it was a party. Right after that, a teen sent a support screenshot to a driver group I'm in. His fare increased at 1:36 a.m. at the edge of Woodside for 2 additional riders. Not in my car, but someone else's. Different make, different mirror, same red tint. Maybe it's a glitch. Maybe it's how fog eats light. Maybe it's a story that the town tells itself, so the living remember to keep their eyes on the road and their hands steady. I don't have a thesis here, only this. There is a place where the mirror carries one more passenger than you do, and she prefers you notice her without turning around. If you do turn, there will be nothing to see. If you don't, the count might climb, and your car will feel a little fuller than it should, and your breath will puff white even when the heater's on. If you cut through the cemetery late, don't make eye contact with your own reflection. Don't check the hair in your rear view. Don't try to prove anything to yourself. Just drive. Let the iron fence go by like the bars of a music box. And don't listen too closely for the click between notes. If you see the red mirror glow, that brick blood shade that touches everything at the corner of Woodside and the hill, keep going. Take the long way, lose the 2 minutes, and let whoever rides in there count you instead. I never planned to be in a cemetery at midnight with a clipboard and a thermos. But that's exactly where my grant put me, under the ash trees at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, recording the bell times like it was a normal thing and not the most superstitious job in Westchester County. I'm a historian for a small preservation group in Tarrytown, the kind of person people call when they find a box of old letters in their attic and want to know if they belong in a museum or a garage sale. When the village asked for an accurate sound log of the old Dutch church bells, how they carried, how many seconds apart when they drifted in bad weather, I volunteered. It sounded easy. I like simple tasks. You start a recorder, you write down times, you go home. It was a dry October night, jacket weather. The air smelled like leaves and a little bit like the river. You could hear the low freight horns from the Hudson if you stopped moving. My coworker Maya was with me. She's the practical one. Teacher voice, headlamp, a neon vest like we were going to get run over by a ghost and needed to be visible. We set up where the gravel path forks near the old section, the part with crooked stones and names worn down to only vowels. The old Dutch church bell tower sits just beyond the cemetery fence. The sound moves through the tombs like water. Our grounds guy, Frank, had let us in before closing. He said the same thing people always say if you stand anywhere near this place after sunset. Stay on the path. If the bells skip, don't be dramatic about it. What does that even mean? I asked, smiling at the time. Frank just shrugged and locked the gate behind us. He's a tall man, but in this place at night he looked shorter, pulled in by the darkness. We started the log at 11:54 p.m. I kept my eyes on the face of my watch, which I'd synced to an atomic clock app. I had a Tascam recorder clipped to my jacket, a backup running on my phone in airplane mode, and a small notebook I'd already ruined with coffee. We were supposed to record through the top of the hour, note any double strikes, any weird ring-off. The church bell has a habit of stuttering when the weather dries out. Around 12:40 a.m., a cop car rolled past on Broadway, lights off, slow and watchful. Background character stuff, one of the individuals who exist in the edges of your night. Maya lifted a hand so they wouldn't shine a spotlight through the fence. After a minute, they were gone. The village sleeps weirdly quiet in October. The tourist crowds drop off after the last hayride. You get owls. You get the creak of trunks. You get this feeling that the ground isn't big enough to hold this much history and maybe it's leaking. I know how that sounds. I don't believe everything. I teach classes about how to check claims, how to read records. I am a rational person. I'm 37. I have bad knees from fencing in college, and I still get paper cuts. At 12:55, the night thickened in the way sound does when fog is coming, even though the air felt clear. The ash trees above us turned their leaves wrong side out. The electric clock on my phone read 12:55:10. The digits felt heavy. I checked my watch, same time. The first tick of the hour, one dial, was 5 minutes away. I drew a box in my notebook to write it down cleanly. You hear that? Maya whispered. I don't hear anything. Exactly. The distant freight horns, the crickets, the occasional tire hiss, gone. Even the wires overhead sounded like they'd been unplugged. The silence didn't feel like quiet. It felt like thick glass between us and the world. I don't know how to explain what happened next in a way that doesn't sound like a bad trick. Nothing flashed. No cold spot, no mist. I looked down to check my watch, 12:58:01, then 02, then 103. And somewhere in the blink I missed. Both my watch and my phone advanced to 101. My first thought was that I'd pressed something, or I'd scrolled by accident, but the Tascam time code matched. The recorder had marked 12:58:49, 12:58:50, and then it jumped. The whole hour swallowed a minute like it didn't exist. The bell hadn't struck once in that interval. 1 second I braced for 2 more minutes of waiting. The next second the first stroke of 1 o'clock smacked the air like a plank. I just stood there and listened to it count. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 1. It shouldn't have sounded that loud, but I had the feeling we'd been underwater and someone had yanked us out by the collar. Did you see that? I asked, too loud. Maya didn't answer right away. She was looking at her phone. The blue light made her look sick. I have a voicemail, she said, and like an idiot I laughed because why would that be notable? From who? She flipped the screen toward me. No caller ID. Timestamp, 12:59 a.m. That's impossible, I said, because when something is wrong, your mouth defaults to a classroom sentence. She hit play before I could tell her not to. The message was 27 seconds long. A woman's voice, not whispering, but speaking like she was careful with the edges of her words. No static. The tone was tired more than anything, like the end of a long shift. Excuse me, the woman said, formal as a stranger on a dark street. I'm sorry to trouble you. Would you walk me home? There was a pause long enough that I said, what? Out loud, even though I knew I was listening to a recording and not a call. Then, I'm by the gate, the old one with the iron wisteria. I don't like to cross alone when the clocks are wrong. The message clicked off. Oh, goodbye, no name. No car passing in the background to tell me she was at least in our century. I looked at Maya. She looked over my shoulder toward the oldest part of the cemetery where a wrought iron arch. No wisteria. Just a scroll. Has been left locked for decades. We're being messed with, I said, trying it out. Kids, Maya shook her head. They'd be giggling by the end of that message, she said. Listen to her. We replayed it until we had sentences memorized. The more I listened, the more a small thing started to bother me. After I'm sorry to trouble you, there's a sound people make when they're standing still and the air is cold, a little tight inhale. It was there. After the clocks are wrong, there was another sound lower, almost mechanical, like something turning over with weight. Old iron on a hinge. I wrote hinge in my notes and drew an arrow toward the arch. We did not go to the gate that night. I'm not brave. Also, we had a job. We finished the log, locked the equipment in Maya's trunk, and drove down to the 24-hour diner by the river. The waitress, Nora, knows us by habit. 2 coffees, 2 waters, 1 plate of fries to ruin my attempts at a normal diet. I tried to bring up the voicemail in a way that didn't make us sound like idiots. You ever get weird calls on Halloween season? I asked her. It's October, she said. I get weird everything. What did they do, forget a line and ask for a do-over? Maya put her phone between the salt and the ketchup bottle. No ID, she said. Came through when our phones were in airplane mode. Nora stopped what she was doing with the checkbook and gave us a look that said she both believed and didn't want to. Don't play it, she said. I'm closing alone. We won't, I said. We played it anyway, later, outside in the parking lot because people always think distance will make a thing smaller. The next afternoon, I took the recording to my office and tried to track the number. You can't, not really. It showed up as unknown. But when I clicked into the details, my phone gave me a string of digits I didn't recognize. 914-267-1703, that's our area code. The rest isn't anything I could match to a person. On a stupid impulse, I typed the digits into my Terrytown Cemetery index. We keep a clumsy old database of inscriptions, photos, restoration notes. I didn't expect anything. It returned exactly 1 hit. In 2003, a volunteer named June had done rubbings of a section of old stones toppled near the church fence. One of them, a colonial marker for a woman named Charity Archer, 1799, had modern graffiti scratched into the base sometime in the late 1970s. The volunteer noted the defacing, copied the digits by hand, and filed the rubbing under A. I pulled the binder and found the paper, thin and charcoal dusted. The graffiti had been done with something sharp, maybe a nail under the carved epitaph. The digits in June's pencil rubbing were clear as a headline, 94267-1103. Someone had carved a local phone number into an 18th century headstone 4 or 5 decades ago. It shouldn't have matched anything on our phones in 2025, and yet there it was. I wanted badly to believe it was a prank that had lasted too long. I went to see Frank. He was in the maintenance shed, warming his hands on a space heater that smelled like dust. When I showed him the rubbing and told him the rest, he nodded like I'd reported a pothole. The bad luck minute, he said. It's a thing here. That's not a thing, I said, and immediately felt like a freshman arguing with a tenured professor. He shrugged. Sometimes a minute gets eaten around 1 in the morning, he said. You can set your watch by it. I don't know why. We have theories, and we, old-timers, people who've lived here long enough to see a few wrong clocks. There's a story about Charity Archer everyone knows and no one agrees on. Some say she died asleep in a pew waiting for her father to close up. Some say she stepped off the path and went down in the creek on a storm night, and in the morning they found her with a lantern still burning. Some say she had a habit and she'd wait just after midnight by the gate. This one, he pointed at the rubbing, and she'd walk up to the road if someone would walk with her. People didn't like to cross alone then either. They were scared of wolves. Or men. Walk where? I asked. He looked mildly offended. Home, he said. Where else? I went back to my office, printed out the volunteers' notes, and made a map of the path from Archer's Stone to the old iron gate. It's about 100 yards through tilted markers, then a straight shot to the arch. Beyond that is the road, and beyond that is a long, dark line of trees, and beyond that, houses. I love maps because maps make everything simple and manageable. I could trace a finger over the line and say, you go here, and then you're safe. As a kid, I drew treasure maps in the backyard for my sister, even though there never was any treasure. I forgot something important doing that the map doesn't cross the dark for you. We went back the next night. I know, we shouldn't have, but historians are stubborn and Maya is worse than me. We told ourselves it was for the job. Document the anomaly. If nothing happened, we'd still get clean bell times and maybe a raccoon sighting to make Frank feel smug. We signed in on Frank's clipboard like responsible people. The air felt more normal. Crickets back on duty, the river busy again. At 12:50, a group of late-night walkers went past the fence with those tiny LED dog leashes that look like they're being led by glowworms. One of them, a teenager in a denim jacket, shouted, "Don't get cursed." And his friend hissed, "Shut up," like you don't say certain things too loud here. The cop car passed again, did a small U-turn, and stopped long enough for the officer to lean out and tell us, "Call dispatch if you get anything strange." It was meant as kindness. It sounded like a dare. At 12:57, the night pressed in like the day before. The glass over everything feeling, the dip in sound. My phone ticked 12:58, 24, and then there it went again. 1:01. The bell struck like a door being hammered. And my phone lit with a voicemail icon. The timestamp said 12:59 a.m. We did not open it immediately. We walked on the path like normal. We finished our job. Then we stood quietly next to the iron arch and hit play. "Excuse me?" The voice said, exactly as before, and I felt my mouth go dry. "I'm sorry to trouble you. Would you walk me home?" Another pause. Then, "I am near the lots for the Archer family. The gate is so very loud. I don't like to cross alone when the clocks are wrong." In the background, you could hear a bell strike a half-stroke, like someone swung the clapper gently against the side and changed their mind. Maya pressed the phone against her chest as if that could keep it from being heard by anything else. "We could just go stand by the Archer plot," she said. "For a minute." "If it makes us feel better." "Why would that make us feel better?" "Because if this is a person, they might be scared. And if it's not a person, it's a recording. And we're giving ourselves a job to do so we won't be two idiots in the dark. There are many ways fear makes you useful. Sometimes it turns you into a light switch checker. Sometimes it turns you into a person who wants to help strangers at terrible hours." We walked to the Archer stone. It wasn't hard to find. The volunteer notes were right. And I'd looked at the photo so many times that the cracks in the granite already felt familiar. Someone had left a spray of dried blue flowers there last week. The carved number, if you didn't know to look for it, just looked like a scratch at the base. Once you knew, you couldn't not see it. I dialed the digits because I'm a fool. You should know that. I dialed them while we stood at the stone. The line clicked once loudly like a physical disconnect, and then instead of ringing, I heard a soft shift like cloth moving. And then distance like when you call an old business number and somehow reach a voicemail box that hasn't been used in years. But then a voice answered. Not the woman. A child or a small person, breathy with sleep. "Just a moment," they said, bright and polite, as if their jaw was close to the receiver and their hand over the mouthpiece. "She's putting on her shawl." "Who is this?" I asked, and my voice came out wrong, too loud and adult for that space. They didn't answer the question. In the background, I heard a door hinge, a soft, uncertain laugh that might have been nerves or might have been the sound a throat makes when the cold air surprises it. Then the line went quiet. We didn't move. I didn't think about running. I thought about how generous it felt. The notion of a person saying she was sorry to trouble you and asking if you would walk her home. I thought of my sister at 21 calling me from a dark campus lot and asking me to stay on the phone until she reached her dorm. I thought about all the ways people get from door to door, scared and pretending not to be. Maya took out her phone and turned on her flashlight. "If we're doing this, we're doing it slow," she said. "Like a person walks when they're worried about ice," so we did. We walked the path toward the gate. I kept my mouth shut and counted my steps, and sometimes I put my hand out to the air next to me like I was making space for someone. If you ever do this, don't look to the side. Looking makes you greedy for proof. Just walk. A rabbit moved in the dark, and I almost stepped on my own laces. I heard distinctly the sound of an iron fence giving a little under a careful push. Then, still walking, I heard a small voice say, "Thank you," right at the level of my left shoulder. It was so exactly placed that I stopped like I'd been grabbed. "Did you?" I said. "Keep walking," Maya said, and her practical voice was shaking. We reached the old iron arch. It's permanently chained, but the chain has slack. The road beyond was calm, empty. No cars, no joggers. The village sleeping behind its windows. The arch made a noise then. The sound in the voicemail. Old metal turning over on itself, patient and not sorry. The kind of sound that happens when you move a thing that hasn't wanted to be moved in a long time. I stepped back out of reflex. "Home," the woman said. And this time I heard her as if she were facing the road, not us. "That will do. What is home?" I asked before I could stop myself. It was the stupidest question I've ever asked and probably the only one that mattered. She didn't answer. Somewhere out on the road, a fox barked once and then twice, sharp and annoyed, like it had been interrupted. The air lost its glassy pressure. The crickets switched back on. A freight horn downriver cut the night in half. We stood there looking at the chain on the gate for a long time. On the walk back, I looked at the ground because that felt safer than looking anywhere else. The gravel had two thin lines through it, parallel, regular, the way a wheeled suitcase leaves marks. But they stopped abruptly near the Archer plot, like someone had lifted the bag and carried it. I didn't mention the marks. I didn't want them in the story I was going to tell myself later about how this was a prank with excellent direction. We didn't sleep much. We didn't tell Nora about it, though I think she knew something. People always know when a story is sitting, waiting to be said. The next morning I opened my email to find a message from June, the volunteer who'd done the rubbings years ago. I hadn't written to her, but she still checks our general inbox sometimes. The subject line was Archer. The body contained 2 lines. "Don't pick up the call," she wrote. "If you promise to walk her home, keep your promise." I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say that didn't sound like an apology to a person who hadn't asked for my opinion. I went to the county records office and looked for anything on a charity archer who died in 1799. There's only so much paper that survives that far back for a woman who wasn't rich. I found a burial record from the old Dutch church, a name and a date and 2 words. Found near. I stared at those words until I convinced myself they meant something other than what they meant. Found near what? Found near whom? I copied the record and slipped it into a folder as if I could shut a drawer on it inside myself. 2 nights later, we went back one more time. I don't know why. I told myself it was because you never trust an anomaly on 1 or 2 observations. You test a thing until you're sure. The truth is, we went back because we had been asked for something simple, and there is a narrow pleasure in doing a simple task right, even when you don't understand it. We set up in the same place. The same officer drove past, gave us the same look. At 12:58, the time jumped to 1:01. The bell hit the hour, and then my phone did something I've never seen a phone do. It lit up as if it were ringing, but the name on the screen wasn't unknown. It said my name, not the way a call from my own number shows up with the tiny box that says maybe you. It said my first name like someone had typed it in and decided to adopt it. The timestamp read 12:59. We let it go to voicemail because we are cowards. I almost didn't play it. But not knowing is worse sometimes than knowing the thing that will wake you up at 3 a.m. The message was the same woman's voice, except without the formal opening. She said my name the way you say a familiar street. "I don't want to trouble you more than I already have," she said, like she knew she'd crossed a line. "But would you walk me home again? The clocks are wrong." I hit delete without thinking, like a reflex, like if I didn't let the sound exist, it couldn't ask anything of me. After I did, the little trash can icon flashed and then disappeared, and the message returned to my inbox on its own. I don't know how. I don't have a good story for that part. I turned my phone off. Maya looked at me with her head cocked like a dog who has heard an unplaceable noise. "We can say no," she said, careful. "We can say we're done." "I think we already said yes," I said, which was not a sentence I had planned on saying in a graveyard or anywhere. We walked to the Archer stone. The air had a taste like snow coming even though the sky was clear. I kept my left hand slightly out, ready to be polite. Before we took the first step, the chain on the iron arch down the path gave a small, almost prim sigh, like a person resigned to a thing that must be done again. I don't know why that sound made my eyes sting. It did. We took the path. At the halfway mark, something else happened that doesn't play well when I tell it. It sounds like I'm trying too hard. We were moving slow, the way you do when you mean it, and from the right of the path, near the mulberries, 2 figures stepped into the open. Teenagers, heads down, phone light bobbing, hands in hoodies. They looked up at us and looked confused, like we weren't where we were supposed to be. Then one of them, the one in the denim jacket, said, "Oh," in a way you don't say "oh" when you see 2 normal people. He put his phone down and stepped aside. He held his breath as if not to fog a window. The other one followed. joint and eyes wide like he was trying to be small. They backed off the path to let someone pass. Someone, not us. After a beat, they realized we were the only visible bodies and started dying of embarrassment in the way teen boys do. We didn't say anything. We just kept walking and they slunk away, still trying to figure out how they'd just made room for nothing. At the gate, the same thing as before. The iron spoke softly in its own tongue. The road beyond was quiet. I felt a pressure release at my left shoulder. A small thing like a breath you hold until you see the porch light. Then the bell misfired somewhere behind us, half a strike, and the cold slid out of the path as if it had been folded and put away. We might have left it there. 2 nights, some bad timekeeping, some calls we could declare were a hoax and bury under a file label. But the resolution to this, if I'm being honest, isn't a resolution. A week later, the village held a little event. Fall lights through the cemetery, lanterns down the main path, docents telling tidy stories about the names people still recognize. I worked one of the tables near the north gate, pouring cider and answering questions about restoration. Kids in tiny witch hats ran between legs. Couples took photos of the lock on the gate because locks are romantic if you don't think about them too much. It was normal. It was safe. At 8:12 p.m., early, long before the weird minute, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. The display said unknown. I almost didn't check it. Work nights are for work. But habit is a lever. I hit play. "Excuse me," a man's voice said, accented slightly. Older, a tone that suggested a hat in hand. "I'm sorry to trouble you. Would you walk me home?" I closed the app. I put the phone in my pocket and poured cider until my hand ached. When the last guests left and the docents went back to their cars, I walked to the Archer stone alone and set the empty cider pitcher by the base. I'm not religious. I don't talk to stones, but I put my hand on the grit and said quietly, "We're trying." It's October again as I write this. The clocks are wrong more often than they're right here. If you stand very still near the path just before 1, sometimes you'll hear a hinge manage its own weight without anyone touching it. People call and they ask for simple things in voices that sound tired and polite. There is always a moment when I pause and think about saying no, because boundaries are important and a person can't walk everyone home. Then I look at the iron arch, and the slack in the chain that always seems an inch more giving when the bells skip. And I think about how a place can be a home, even when it's the last place. I think about the teenager who stepped aside for someone he refused to see, and the cop who meant well, and the waitress who didn't want a recording in her empty diner, and the groundsman who knows you don't make a scene when the hour slips. I think about a woman who doesn't like to cross alone when the clocks are wrong, and how I don't either, and how strange it is that we all pretend we do. If you ever get a message like that and you don't know what to do, I can't tell you what's right. I can tell you what I do. I put my phone in my pocket. I keep my hand level with my left shoulder. I stay on the path. I don't look sideways for proof. When the air goes thick and the world goes under glass, I count to 12 like I'm learning it again. I keep my promise. Sometimes weeks after, a new voicemail appears with a timestamp for a minute that doesn't exist, from a number no one should have carved. Sometimes it says my name. Once, in the middle of a night I really needed to sleep, it said, "Your turn to be walked home." And I said no out loud in my dark apartment and woke up sweating because the word didn't feel like mine when I said it. The last thing is small and stupid, but it bothers me. The rubbing with the number we found under the Archer stone? In the photo I took when we started all this, the scratch sits by itself, neat and shallow. Last week when I checked the stone again, because we're always checking, the digits looked deeper. Not fresh, not jagged, just more certain, as if someone had gone back over the stroke to keep it from fading. I told myself weather does that. Water finds a groove and makes it an address. I told myself the rubbing always looked like that and my eyes were looking with new rules. But the paper in my file, the one the volunteer did in 2003, has a note in the margin I swear wasn't there before. In pencil, in June's handwriting, "Home is the road." I didn't write that. I don't know why it helps, it does. It's easier to walk with someone when there isn't a door you have to imagine opening at the end. The arch, the chain, the dark street beyond, the road is the home. You walk as far as the arch will let you. You stand just inside and you make a shape in the air like a shoulder. You listen for the hinge. The bells will skip. The town will pretend they didn't. You'll get another voicemail a minute you can't find on any clock. You don't have to believe me. I don't want you to. I just needed to put this somewhere. where if I'm late one night and my phone calls you at an hour that doesn't exist, you'll know what to do. Stay on the path. Don't run. Don't look too hard for proof. And if she asks you, be kind. Walk her home. I don't expect anyone to believe this. I barely do, and I was there, and I still go back some nights like a moth that hates the porch light but keeps finding it anyway. I'm writing this down because I've started counting my steps to the kitchen, to the mailbox, to the end of my block, and if I don't put the story somewhere outside my own head, I think the counting is going to follow me into sleep and keep going without me. I work, or I used to work, as a docent at Huguenot Cemetery in St. Augustine, Florida. If you visited, you probably remember the coquina walls that look like beach pressed into bricks, and the old oak shouldering everything with drapes of Spanish moss, and the trolley bell from the Old Town Loop clanging at the same two corners like a toy someone forgot to turn off. We run evening tours in summer when the heat finally breaks and the air smells like wet leaves and salt. It's not a ghost tour, not officially, but people always ask, and we have a handful of polite legends we can tell without upsetting anyone. There are stories I'm not supposed to tell. There's one I never told, not once, not out loud. It didn't matter. The story told itself. My first week, Rudy, the groundskeeper, pointed at the gates. 1, 2, 3, he said, like he was counting kids crossing a street. If you're closing up, you chain them in that order. Don't get creative. Don't stand under the big live oak when the wind's up. And if you hear the trolley bell after 9, you didn't hear it. Maya, my supervisor, rolled her eyes. He likes to spook the new hires. I like to keep them, Rudy said, and spat into the dirt just to have something to do with his mouth. Gate number 3 doesn't like staying shut. Maya pinched the bridge of her nose like she was smoothing a wrinkle out of the night. Gate 3 sticks. That's it. Don't force it. Jiggle and lift. I believed Maya until the first time I locked it myself. Gate 1 is by the little office with the warped window and the sunflower magnet on the mini fridge. Gate 2 is along the wall that runs against San Marco Avenue, where the traffic shakes the coquina dust into halos around the streetlights. Gate 3 is in the corner where the ground dips just enough for rain to make a shallow puddle, and the moss hangs thicker than anywhere else. It's the last one, the one you chain when you're ready to go home, the one you pass again if you're doing a final walk. Its latch is smooth from 100 years of hands, though that can't be right, and the metal always feels warmer than the air. We don't talk much about the child's plot by Gate 3. The marker is small and older than anything around it is supposed to be. It lists a first name and a year that doesn't make sense with the cemetery's dates. We chalk it up to misplacement or lore, or we just don't chalk it up at all. On the laminated map we hand to visitors, that rectangle is just a blank space like the printer skipped, and we didn't notice. The night this started, I had a last-minute group, the kind that books at sunset and shows up when the sky is bruised purple and you can't tell where the river breeze ends and the old stones begin. There were 8 of them, a couple from Atlanta who said they used to come here as kids, 3 college girls in matching sandals, a father with his teenage son who didn't want to be there at all, and a guy alone, sunburnt, carrying a DSLR with a lens that blinked at me like an eye with a scratch. I did my usual intro at the gate, the official iron arch with its paint flaked down to white bone, and we stepped in, and the temperature dropped that Florida way, just a degree or two, like someone opened a fridge of wet earth. We walked past the infant section, the markers small and close together like teeth, and the man with the camera took pictures every 3 steps, his finger clicking like an insect's mind. I told them about yellow fever and quarantine, about the old city gate at the end of the street and how people would leave messages there, about the lamplighter who broke his ankle and was found 2 days later by a dog that wouldn't stop barking at nothing. We reached the first big oak and I heard the trolley bell. It wasn't 9 yet and the last loop had passed 30 minutes earlier. The bell came from the wrong direction anyway, not from the road but from inside, muffled like it wanted to be polite. I ignored it. I kept moving. The group kept crowded in close like they were at a bonfire that didn't give off light. There are lines I use on every tour, cadences that work on the living the way hymns do. Pause here, point there, say that sentence about how graves subside when the coffins give way, and watch someone glance down at their shoes like they're checking for a trapdoor. I never mention the grave by Gate 3. I never say the first name. I didn't that night. Still, when we reached the second oak, the one with the lightning scar that looks like a hand, my tongue tried to. I felt it in the back of my throat. the syllables like something swallowed wrong, and I coughed and said, "All right," and the word came out like a penny dropped on stone. The father asked if the cemetery really closed at 9. What happens if someone stays? We sweep, we lock up. We call Rudy and he grumbles. The kid, arms folded, looked at the moss and said, "Feels like it locks by itself." We all laughed too loud. When we were near the far wall, I started counting my steps the way I always do to keep my timing even. It's about 60 from the second oak to the corner path if you take it slow. I don't count out loud. That night I did, but only in my head, and still somehow everyone heard me. Because when I reached 13, the college girls all turned at once like a flock and stared at the same spot. The shadow by the third gate. No one was there. Not a person. Just the gate with its bars and the puddle and the rain smell that wasn't from rain. The chain on the gate shifted a link and settled like a tired sigh. I said something about the coquina again to make everyone's eyes go somewhere else. The camera guy took a picture of the corner and looked at his display and frowned. He changed his angle and took another and frowned harder. He caught my eye and held the camera out like a man offering a strange fruit. I looked. The first picture showed the corner and the gate and the moss and a smear of something white like a reflection, except there was nothing to reflect. The second picture showed the same, except the smear had a shape to it. Not human the way a person is, but human the way a story is. Head, shoulders, hair like wet grass plastered to a forehead. The face wasn't a face. It was lighter than everything around it, the way a missing word is lighter than the rest of a sentence. I said, "It's the long exposure. Your eye sews up, see?" I didn't know what I was saying. He didn't say anything. He swiped to the next photo and I watched his thumbnail shake. We finished the tour. I kept it tight and careful, and I didn't look at the third gate again until the end, when I went to lock up. The group filtered out murmuring the way people do when they're stepping back into their Thursday lives. The father tipped me. The kid didn't say thank you, but he didn't not say it either. And that felt normal and good, which I clung to like a rope. I did the last walk with my flashlight low. 1, 2, 3. I chained gate 1, then gate 2, lifting and jiggling like Maya said. Then I went to gate 3. The chain was already through the bars. I don't remember doing that. The lock sat on the coquina ledge like a paperweight. I picked it up and my palm flinched. It was warm, not from the air, not from the day. Warm like it had been in someone's pocket or someone's hand. I snapped it onto the chain and pulled to check it, and the chain clinked against the bars and I heard a small breath right by my elbow. Like the kind a kid makes when they're trying hard not to laugh in a place they're not supposed to laugh. "Good night," I said to empty air, because sometimes being polite to things you don't see is how you find your car keys in the morning. When I turned and walked away, I counted my steps because it calms me. 1, 2, 3, 4. By 13, the hairs on my arm stood up, all of them like a field of grass under static. I didn't turn around. I didn't run. I walked back to the office, shoved the clipboard into the drawer, and when I pulled the door shut, the trolley bell clanged once from inside the cemetery, deep and hollow like something trapped under a basin. I told myself it was a noise carried on the wind. I told myself the city loves its sounds. I told myself not everything is about me. At home, in my little apartment above the shop that sells replicas of old maps and framed shells, I dreamed about counting. In the dream, 13 was a step up that wasn't there, and I stumbled. And when I looked for what had tripped me, my foot was inside a rectangle of dirt with no marker. A hand reached up from under the dirt, small and not awful, and touched my ankle exactly once like a question. I woke up with my heart battering the inside of my ribs like a moth in a lampshade. The next 2 nights I asked to do morning tours. Maya said sure, because in summer mornings are slow and we need the labor at sundown. I didn't explain why I asked. I didn't look at the calendar. On the 3rd night, the schedule had me back at closing. That evening, the sky went from pink to metal in 5 minutes. You know that flip the weather does here, how it's like someone pulled a lid over the day? The humidity doubled with no time in between. A storm rolled across the river and stopped at the bridge like it forgot something and then remembered. The trolley bell didn't ring at all. The group was small. 2 sisters who drove down from Jacksonville and a house painter on his day off in a white t-shirt that had a smear of blue at the hem, like he wiped his hand and forgot. We walked, and the moss felt so heavy I wanted to push it up with my palm to help the branches breathe. The girls whispered the way sisters do. in a language that sounds like English if you don't have anyone you trust like that. The house painter asked about the oldest stone, and I said it changes depending on which family argues hardest. We wound toward the corner. I wasn't counting my steps. I'm being honest, I was trying very hard not to. When you try not to think the number is the only thing in your mouth. We passed the second oak and the handprint scar, and thunder rolled so close the ground moved under my shoes like muscle. A little boy was standing by the third gate. I didn't see him walk up. He wasn't there, and then he was. White shirt too big, sticking to his chest like it had been wrung out. Shorts I recognized because I've bought the same cotton kind for nephews. Sneakers so dark they didn't catch the light at all, like someone had cut the shape of shoes out of the evening. His hair lay flat and wet. If you've ever seen a kid who's been in the bath too long, that wrinkled softness across the knuckles, that's what I noticed. It's dumb that that's what I noticed. But it's always the small things. He watched the gate with a concentration I reserve for stove burners. Then he looked at me, and all at once I knew, with the kind of knowledge that arrives complete, like a coin dropped into your palm, this is the plot we never point at. This is the name I never say. Is he with you? One of the sisters asked. The boy turned his head toward her slow, like he was reluctant to take his eyes off the gate, and she made a sound meant to be friendly that was really just a question without a mark. I'm sorry, buddy, I said, because that's how I talk to kids I don't know. The cemetery's closed for families right now. Come back in the morning, okay? He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He lifted his right hand like the start of a wave and then put it down and went back to looking at the gate, which was chained. The lock was on it. I had put it on it before the tour. I remembered the warm iron against my palm. The chain slackened a half-inch and contracted like something breathing inside a chest you can't see. Thunder piled up over us and slid off the roof of the sky. Do you want me to call someone? The house painter asked. Like his folks? I opened my mouth to say yes, and the boy looked at me again, and I don't know why this next part happened. I don't know why I did it. It wasn't courage. It wasn't stupidity, though I wish it had been. It was the feeling you get when you're at a door and you can tell by listening, just listening, that there is something on the other side trying to remember the shape of doorknobs. I said, "We'll just walk." We walked. I took them around the long way so we wouldn't pass him again. The house painter kept glancing back. The sisters whispered in a tight loop that probably included my name and maybe their mother's. At the office, I made a call. It rang, and then Rudy answered on the fourth ring with a hello that sounded like he had just woken up and put his boots on his voice. I told him. I tried to make it a normal report. Unattended minor. Gate 3. Could he come by? He said, "I'll be there in 10, and added, almost too soft to catch, "Don't count." I hung up, and the first fat drops of rain hit the coquina and exploded into little dust islands. I locked gate 1. I locked gate 2. I went to gate 3. The boy wasn't there. The chain hung with a curve in it like a smile, and the lock. This isn't possible. But here we are. The lock was off but still closed. The U of it snapped into the body, resting on the coquina ledge exactly the way my set of keys rests on the table when I come in, and forget them and remember them, and forget them again. The metal was beaded with sweat. When I touched it, heat crawled up my fingers. I would have dropped it, but my hand wouldn't open. Behind me, somebody ran. I turned. The house painter had sprinted 2 steps and then stopped like his feet hit glue. "Did you see?" he started and didn't finish. The sisters were holding each other with their arms crossed over each other's backs like a single person trying to hug themselves from 2 angles. The boy was standing now where he hadn't been 2 seconds earlier, right behind the sisters, looking down at their sandals the way kids look at adult shoes, as if they are ridiculous but they also mean something. Water ran off his hair and didn't make him any wetter. "Buddy," I said again, and my voice did that thing your voice does when you want it to stay gentle, and your throat no longer cares what you want. He lifted his hand. This time he kept it up. He pointed not at the gate, at the ground, at the path between the gate and the little unmarked rectangle of dirt that looks like nothing unless you already know what it is. The trolley bell rang from somewhere inside the cemetery. It rang once and the sound couldn't leave the moss. It stayed with us, a clamped circle of brass noise that found my molars and bit. Rudy's truck pulled up on the other side of the wall. I've never been so grateful for the sound of an old engine coughing. He swung the big iron keyring as he walked like a man in a play doing a caricature of a man with keys. He saw our faces and didn't tell a joke. He saw the boy and didn't say his name. He said, "All right." The rain came in earnest, the Florida kind that erases the space between things. Rudy unhooked the chain and stepped through gate 3. The boy stepped back. Just one step. I took a step forward without meaning to, and the sisters took a step back because when someone moves toward a thing your body knows is wrong, you move away to even the world out. Rudy said, "I'm going to walk him to the front, all right? You go to the office. Lock the doors. Wait for me. What if he runs?" the house painter asked. "He won't." Rudy looked at the boy, then at me. "Count to 12. I don't." 12, he said, not unkind. He took the boy's hand. I know how that sounds, he did. He took his hand the way you take a kid's hand when a parking lot is full of rain and a stupid kind of darkness. The boy let him. They walked along the path. 1, 2, without wanting to, I counted. I got to 11 and something in my mouth decided to stop. At 12, they reached the small rectangle. Rudy paused. The boy looked down at the dirt the way people look at the pictures of themselves when they were kids, and try to decide if they see the shape of their face in there. Rudy said something I couldn't hear because the rain had built walls between us. When they reached the office path, the boy let go of Rudy's hand and kept walking. He walked the wrong way. He walked toward the oak with the handprint, then turned and walked back toward the third gate, then turned and walked toward the far wall, like he was trying doors in a hallway he didn't recognize anymore. He didn't look lost. He looked patient. Rudy reached for him and missed not because the boy dodged, but because his hand landed exactly where the boy had just been a second earlier. The boy lifted his head and looked at me, and though I couldn't have told you what color his eyes were if you'd offered me money, I knew they were the same as the river when a storm is about to make a decision. "Back to the office," Rudy said. Not taking his eyes off him, I didn't go. Neither did the sisters or the house painter. The rain was trying to push us from the world. The moss drank and drooped. The trolley bell rang a second time, softer, as if it had moved farther away not by distance but by years. The boy lifted his hand for the third time and pointed at the ground again. And this time I heard a voice, not out loud, not with ears, but the way you hear your own name when someone says it in a crowded room and you turn without thinking. It wasn't words. It was that shape words make before they become words. It said the number I had been counting toward my whole life without knowing it. 13. I took a step. "No," Rudy said. He didn't raise his voice. It carried anyway. "Don't," I stopped. It felt like trying to hold back a shrug. The boy's hand trembled for the first time. His face, which had been not a face, did something like a face does when the person inside it is about to cry, but isn't allowed to. He turned, he walked to the gate. He touched the chain like he was checking a stitch on a sleeve. He walked through it. The chain didn't move. I don't know how to tell you what I saw without sounding like I'm trying to improve it. There was the gate, and there was the space between the bars. And there was the rain filling every space. And the boy was on one side of the gate, and then he was on the other side of the gate, and the chain was exactly where it had been. Warm iron curve. Lock like a closed mouth. He paused with his back to us and let the rain draw lines down his shoulders. He lifted one hand and pressed it flat against the bar. The skin didn't blanch. He held it there for a count I didn't count, then dropped it and walked into the corner where the coquina wall jogs and the moss makes a curtain. He stopped and there was nothing to see but water. We did go back to the office then. Rudy locked the door. He smelled like metal and mulch. He took off his hat and set it down and left a circle of wet on the desk like a tide line around his patience. I said, "What is he?" "Who?" Rudy said, "You don't say his name." "I don't know his name." "You don't know it yet." Maya came in 10 minutes later looking like someone who had folded an umbrella back into the wrong shape. We told her. She listened the way supervisors listen, with the part of her that cares about us and the part of her that cares about the incident report, and the larger part that tries to keep those two parts from chewing each other. When we finished, she blew a breath up at the damp hair stuck to her forehead. "It's a cemetery," she said, which is what you say when you don't have a better thing to put in the air. People see things they brought with them. Rudy looked at her and didn't say the thing he didn't say. The sisters and the house painter signed statements with addresses and phone numbers that I don't think exist anymore. We all walked out together. The rain had moved on like a traveling show. The puddle at Gate 3 had become a mirror full of sky. The next day, the camera guy from the first night came back when I was alone in the office and held out a thumb drive like an apology. "Just look," he said, and left before I could say I wasn't supposed to. On the office computer, I clicked the file. The first photo of Gate 3 showed a white smear. The second showed the smear becoming a shape. The third showed a boy's hand and the point of his shoulder and the slope of a cheek with the soft fat still tucked under the skin. The fourth showed the space where he would be. I closed the window, ejected the drive, set it aside like evidence from a crime that hadn't decided to happen yet, and walked outside to breathe. It was bright. A trolley rolled past and the bell rang, a plain good bell sound that thinned out into the daylight and disappeared. I went to the third gate. The chain lay exactly as I had left it, except the lock was on the inside of the bars now, and that's not what I do. I always lock it on the outside. Everyone does. I put my fingers through the bars to make sure the air still had two sides. I counted my steps back to the office. I didn't want to. I couldn't not. At 13, I passed the little unmarked rectangle, and something in the corner of my eye moved, just enough to make me look. There was nothing there. The feeling of a small hand touching my ankle like a question came and went all at once, the way a bat crosses your path at dusk. I lasted another week. I don't have a good reason for that. People came. I told my polite stories. Rudy mowed the grass and made lines in it with his wheels like he was writing in a language the ground understood better than us. Maya changed the sign-in sheet to ask for email addresses for surveys and never sent a survey. The trolley bell behaved itself. Friday night, I had a big group. A bachelorette party in matching rain ponchos because Florida had decided to sweat again. A retired teacher who said she'd lived here all her life and loved the old places. And a couple of guys who never stopped holding hands, which was one of the few things that felt okay in the whole world right then. We made it to the corner. I didn't look at the gate until I was there. When I looked, my mouth said a name I had never said. It was a small name, a first name that fits in the space between two fingers. It felt like dropping a spoon and having it fall up. Everyone looked at me. "Who's that?" the teacher asked politely, the way someone asks a question they think will make your story better. "No one," I said. Didn't sound like no one. I swallowed. "There's a plot there we don't talk about." "Why not?" I didn't have an answer. I had been told the rule, not the reason. I had followed it the way you follow the contour of your own face shaving in a mirror you stop believing in. I said, "He doesn't like it." "Who's he?" one of the ponchos asked, giggling. "Because girls do that when weather and wine and ghosts line up. It isn't mockery. It's a way to hold something without your hands." "The child," I said, and the trolley bell rang once, and the sound went straight down into the puddle and stayed there. A coin on the bottom, the boy was there. He was always there, I think, and I was the one who changed. He stood by the gate looking at it with that same intent, and then he turned his head a little and listened to something I couldn't hear. A gust of wind came from nowhere and flipped every poncho hood up like a prank. The bachelorette party squealed. The retired teacher said, "Oh," very softly, the way you do when the name of a person you don't want to say appears all at once in your throat. One of the men let go of the other man's hand and reached into his pocket and pulled out a quarter and flicked it toward the little unmarked rectangle like it was a well. It hit the dirt and sank like the dirt wasn't there. I said, "We're going to head back," and turned and took a step. At 13, scared as I was, sad as I was, wrong as everything was, I turned and looked because that's what we do when we reach the end of a number. We check the door we've built. The boy was closer now. He had taken a step that I hadn't seen. He lifted his hand and pointed one last time. It wasn't at the ground. It wasn't at the gate. It was at me. Something like shame went through me. I have no reason to say that, but it's true. Shame. Like I'd been called by my middle name in a room full of adults. All the times I'd walked tours around him. All the times I had politely skipped the place where his story should be. The way I counted and pretended I didn't know what I was counting toward. "I'm sorry," I said to him, and I meant it in a way that had nothing to do with the night or the rain or anything that could be written on a form. He dropped his hand. He looked at the gate. He looked at the space between the bars. He looked at the puddle where the bell sound still lived. Then he did something I hadn't seen him do before. He smiled. It wasn't a sweet smile. It wasn't cruel either. It was the smile kids make when they finally get an adult to see the thing they've been pointing at for 10 minutes and the adult says, "Oh." The lights on San Marco went yellow one after another down the block. Something shifted in the moss. The air smelled like oranges for one breath and then like nothing at all. I took a step I didn't count. The party waited, unsure whether this was part of the tour. The retired teacher had tears on her face for reasons that belonged to her alone. The two men found each other's hands again without looking. The boy turned and walked toward the corner. He didn't go through the gate this time. He put his palm on the coquina like it might have a heartbeat. He pressed. His hand left no print. He leaned into the corner and was simply not there. I finished the tour. I don't know how. I said the things I say. People tipped or didn't. They laughed at the places where laughter goes because you can't leave it all the way inside you, or it turns into something else. When they were gone, I locked gate 1, then gate 2. I went to gate 3 and the lock was on the inside again. I didn't move it. I reached through the bars and took it in my hand and held it even though it burned like a hot spoon. And I kept holding it until the heat wasn't heat anymore. Just the knowledge of heat pushed down to a place where it could live without ruining anything. I don't work there now. Maya said it was my choice and I said it wasn't, and we both accepted the lie the way you accept a bandage that won't stick. It's something to put there anyway. On my last day, Rudy handed me a key with no teeth on it. "It doesn't open anything," he said. "It's to hold. What if I hear the bell?" I asked. He shrugged. "Count to 12. "And 13? He looked at me like I already knew. Maybe I do. I walk to get coffee in the morning and count my steps without counting them. And at the 13th, I always look up from whatever I'm pretending I'm thinking about and see a reflection in a window or a kid across the street or a bit of moss on a live oak that's too far north for moss. And I don't say his name because I don't want a story to think it's supposed to follow me home. The last time I went back, the moss was thicker. The puddle had dried to a chalk line that looked like the outline of a map. The third gate was chained with the lock on the inside. I stood there with the iron between us and didn't try to explain anything to anyone, because explanation is a kind of disrespect I can't afford anymore. I touched the bar. It was warm. I counted my steps without sound as I walked away. At 12, the trolley bell rang from nowhere, the way old things remind you that they are the real weather. At 13, I felt a small hand touch my ankle exactly once, like a question, and then let go. I didn't look down. I didn't run. I kept walking until I had more numbers than night, and then I kept walking anyway because that's the only trick I have left. If you visit and you feel yourself counting without meaning to, stop at 12. You'll want to turn and look at the corner by gate 3, and maybe you should and maybe you shouldn't. I can't tell you which choice is the kind that buys you another night of sleep. I can tell you the lock will be warm if you touch it. I can tell you the chain will shift one link and settle. I can tell you that the child whose grave we never mention walks beside you sometimes, just one step, just at 13, just enough to keep you honest about the spaces you leave out. And I can tell you this, the third gate never stays shut. We lock it anyway. We count our steps. We do our best not to say his name. That's all I know. It doesn't feel like enough. It feels exactly like the right amount. I don't usually post, but I don't know what else to do with this. I work nights behind the desk at a small peeling hotel on Bionville. It's the kind of place where the ice machine never works and you can hear the brass band on Bourbon through the windows like someone left a radio on in the wall. My roommate Danny, real name Daniel Dugas but everyone called him D, used to hustle the cemetery tours when the day shifts were slow. He wasn't a licensed guide, not really. He'd hang at the corner where St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 starts to swallow the street and shadow a legit tour, wait for the stragglers and make his pitch in that syrupy voice he used when he wanted something. Mostly it was harmless. He'd tell jokes about movie vampires, point out the above-ground vaults like they were parade floats, make a show of not stepping on tombs. But when the mix was right, bachelorette party guys in Saints jerseys, the bored middle of the afternoon, he'd take them to one of the whitewashed walls of the Queen's tomb. He never said the name directly, because even hustlers in this city know where the line is supposed to be. He'd say the Queen or the Mambo, and then he'd take a stub of chalk from his pocket and show people how to draw 3 X's. Make a wish, leave a tip, he'd grin. And the ones who didn't know better would do it, giggling, snapping photos, There are signs that tell you not to mark the tomb. The real guides tell you flat out not to. There's a guard sometimes. It doesn't matter. People hear stories, they want to touch the story, and chalk is cheap. D had a pocket full of chalk all the time. If it rained, he'd go back after, because he said that was when folks wanted to make fresh marks, like erasing a board to write a new prayer. This was late August, the air thick and mean. The city smelled like hot sugar and the river. I hadn't slept right in a week. The hotel AC unit made a rattling sound like dried beans in a jar. On my break, I'd walk past the cemetery for the shade, watch the tour groups blur around corners like schools of fish. I'd see him there sometimes, tipping his cap to me like we were in some old movie, chalk dust on his fingers, eyes bright. "You're gonna get popped," I told him one day. "They'll ban you." "Who?" "The dead," he said, and winked the way he does when he's pretending not to be scared. I got respect. I don't take nothing. I just show people how to leave a little something for luck. He told me this even though he knew what my grandmother told me when I was a kid. You don't ask the dead for anything. You wouldn't ask a living person to pay. You don't bargain with people who can't answer back. And you don't say the calling word. She said it in her kitchen in St. Bernard, snapping green beans, a fan turning the same hot air over and over. Never say it at a grave, she'd warned. Never say it when you got candles lit. Never say it to make $1. She made me repeat the promise. I can still feel the weight of her stare. Don't say reviens. Do not say come back. It was one of those family warnings that sound silly when you say them out loud in daylight. So it lives in the part of your brain reserved for red lights and snakes. I never told D. I thought it would turn into a joke if I gave it words. That week he did well. He kept coming home with rumpled bills, tossing them onto the table so casually like they didn't cost anyone anything. He bought us a bottle of gin we didn't need and a bag of beignets that left the counters ghost white with sugar and the floor gritty with it. He laughed at me for mopping twice. On Wednesday, he came in late after midnight after my shift. I was awake, staring at the lazy ceiling fan, sweating into the sheet. I smelled him before I heard him. Not him exactly. Candles. Church candles, or the ones you buy at corner stores with saints on them. A sweet waxy smell, and river water, that wet mineral stink that clings to the quarter when the wind's wrong, like the river had walked in behind him and shut the door. "You trying to set a mood?" I asked, pretending I wasn't unnerved. "Tips were real good," he said from the doorway. He didn't switch the light on. People love a little theater. He took a shower with the bathroom door open, steam rolling out like a fog machine. The chalk dust on the sink shone pale under the nightlight. When he came into the room, I saw he was tapped out and shaky like he'd had too much caffeine. In the dim light, I thought his fingers were still dusty, like he'd pressed them to a bag of flour and then tried to wash it off. I told him to crash. He stood looking at the door, though, like he was listening for something. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" But the hallway was quiet except for the ice machine next door coughing air. He slept the way you do on the wrong side of a long day. Not so much sleep as a surrender. I lay there a long time before I drifted off, tasting wax and river grit at the back of my throat. I woke to find 3 nickels stacked neatly on the windowsill, exactly at the place where the frame leaked when it rained. The coins were green around the edges like they'd been wet a long time. I put them in a cup, shrugged it off, and left for work. At the desk, Franny from the morning shift told me she'd seen Dee down by the cemetery with a bachelorette party, pink sashes and everything. "He's gonna catch it," she said, but she smiled when she said it. There's a lot this city will tolerate if you do it with a grin. By Friday, little things started to pile up. The hand towels kept falling off the rack. My house key was half turned in the lock twice when I swore I'd left it straight. There were fingerprints on the bathroom mirror that weren't either of ours, just oval smudges that didn't line up with where a normal hand might touch. The kind of thing you can explain if you want to. The kind of thing you can't explain all at once. Saturday was the first time I saw the X's on our door. It was a cheap apartment. 2 rooms over a t-shirt shop that sold Alligator Nurse, and I got Bourbon t-shirts to people who figured subtlety was a French word they didn't need to learn. The hallway light was burnt out often enough that we carried our phones in our mouths to see the locks, keys clamped between teeth, the screens casting the same cold glow as the soda coolers. I came up around 9 early for me, juggling a bag of red beans and a 6-pack, and my phone lit up 5 chalk X's across our door. Someone had drawn them low at knee height like a child might. Not 3 the way tourists do, but 5. 1 on each corner of the door and 1 in the middle. They weren't new. The edges were ghosted like maybe they'd been there, erased and drawn again. I wiped them with my sleeve and they came away fine. Chalk is chalk. I didn't tell Dee. I told myself it was the kids from downstairs, the ones who left bottle caps in the stairwell. It was easier than thinking about tourists following him home like ducklings. That night he came in at 2, humming something like a dirge, off-key. He smelled like wax and the river again. He had a roll of bills in his hand and his face was lit up like he'd won something. "Listen," he said. "Listen to this one." He took out his phone and played an audio note. I don't know why he recorded it. Maybe he wanted to play it to some drunk at a bar later. It sounded like wind at first, then water. Then a voice you couldn't put a body to, a whisper pinched through a keyhole. You know the sound of a steamboat horn when it's far off? How it's the shape of a sound more than the sound itself, sour and big and hollow. There was that too, underneath the whisper like it was coming through it. The whisper wasn't in English. It was French, I think, or maybe the kind of French that lives under this city, bent and changed. I knew one word when I heard it. He knew it too. He paused the recording right when the voice said it. The word my grandmother told me to never say. Revians. "Where'd you get that?" I asked. He shrugged, but he didn't meet my eyes. "Was showing a group where to scratch the wall," he said, keeping it light. "Lady in a veil shows up, not with the tour, you know? Just there. She asks if she can leave a mark. I say we don't deface nothing, we make a symbol, we show respect. She gives me this look like I told her the punchline to a joke she already knew. And she draws her 3 X's without me. She says the word, quiet, quick, 3 coins on the ledge. I got goosebumps like I stepped in cold water. "You said it back," I said. It wasn't a question. He made a face like it was silly to even consider he hadn't. "I told you. People like theater." I kept my voice flat. "Don't say that word at a grave, man." "Why?" "Because someone taught me not to." He rolled his eyes. "Because you're superstitious. Because everybody likes a rule until it's time to break it. Because if you ask something to come back," I said, "you don't get to decide what walks up." He laughed, and the sound fell wrong in the room. "You hear yourself?" He fell asleep with the TV on a fishing show. A bright little lie in the corner of the dark. I lay awake and tried not to listen for the river inside the walls. The next day, Sunday, the hallway smelled like a blown-out match. When I opened the door, a dusting of white fell in on our feet. Our door was covered in X, not 5, not 3, dozens every inch. Some tidy and small, some big, sliding crooked across what the last one left. All chalk. All ours. "What the hell," he said. He wasn't smiling this time. He rubbed at them with his palm until his skin squeaked. He looked like a kid who'd been caught writing something he couldn't read. "Somebody's messing with me." "Messing with us," I said. We cleaned them off with a damp rag. Chalk turned the water gray in the bowl. We dumped it and watched the gray spin down the drain and thought too hard about where anything goes when it disappears. I would have slept on a friend's couch if I had a friend with a couch. Instead, I made coffee and we sat at the table and listened to the ceiling fan make its loops. He kept looking at the door like an animal waiting for a sound it knows is coming. It started again around midnight. Not the X's knocking, not the usual banging of a neighbor with groceries either. The first knocks were slow and polite. A rhythm like a ceremonial thing. 3, then a pause, then 3 more. I stood up without knowing I was going to. Dee put his hand on my arm and shook his head once. "Don't, probably the kids," I whispered. The knocks came again. The polite rhythm frayed. Quicker. The knuckles dragged on wood. The air inside the apartment turned tight like a thunderstorm was huddled in the bathroom waiting. Under the door, a thin line of water appeared. Just a thin line like the hallway had started to sweat. "Call the guard," he said. He meant the night guy that did rounds in our building. I did. It rang, and inside the ringing I thought I heard a horn. The knocking stopped. We waited. The apartment kind of exhaled around us. He stood up, something like relief making him bigger. He crossed to the door, put his ear to it. "Who's there?" he called. Then stupidly, and I swear I wanted to slap the word out of the air between us, he said, "Viens." He said it soft. He said it like it was nothing more than, "Come on." I felt a pressure in my ears like we were landing after a long flight. The line of water under the door thickened. It pooled and then it moved inward. Not like water normally moves, not a spill or spread, but like a thing crossing a threshold. It left a trail on the linoleum, thin and dark. Not clean water, but the color of a river you don't swim in after a storm. There was no draft, but the candle we kept on the kitchen counter for power outages had a little drip of wax frozen up the side that glistened wet. The room smelled like smoke that had burned out yesterday and forgot to leave. "Don't open it," I said. My grandmother's kitchen was in my mouth again. Don't call what you can't carry. Don't let what you call decide the terms. He didn't open it, but he didn't step away. He touched the wood with his fingertips, chalk white even now from cleaning. He made an absent-minded little motion, like he was drawing without thinking, and when he pulled his hand back, there were faint, wet lines. He looked at his hand like he didn't trust it to be attached to him. We didn't sleep. The air felt used up. At dawn, the line of water on the floor was just a dull stain. When I left for my shift, he was at the table with 2 cups of coffee and a cigarette he didn't smoke, watching the door. At work, Franny asked me if I was sick. I told her no and asked her if she'd ever heard you know anything. She said she heard everything in this city and none of it stuck. A man from Ohio checked in and complained about the mold smell, and I said, "Welcome to New Orleans," and smiled like I'd smiled myself into a mask. At lunch, I bought 2 bundles of fresh sage from the old woman who sets up near the cathedral. Because that's what you do, even if it's theater. She pressed a saint candle into my hands and didn't make me pay for it. "For your mama," she said. And I didn't correct her. When I got home that night, the lock didn't turn easy. The key stuck like it was caught in gum. I jiggled it and it gave with a wet little sound that made my stomach flip. When I pushed the door open, my phone light slid across a wall of chalk. Not X's this time. Not dozens. All the X were there, sure, in lighter and darker lines like a palimpsest, but they were part of something else now. The lines leaned into each other, reorganized, and even before the word made itself, I knew the shape of it. The door was all one word, written tall and narrow across the panels in children's X's thickened into a spine. Rivians. He was sitting on the floor with his back to the couch, knees pulled up, staring at it like a TV. His face looked like it had forgotten how to pretend to be a face. He had the saint candle burning on the table. Wax had poured down the side in a neat ladder like it was following a set of steps only it could see. "Okay," he said, when he realized I was there. The voice that came out of him didn't sound like his. Not deeper, not higher, just like it was inside a jar. "Okay, very funny. Very clever, haha. You did this?" I swear by whatever still listens that I didn't. He watched my face and something in him broke when I didn't rush to answer. He pushed himself up with his hands, leaving chalk smears on the couch. "This isn't me," he said. "I wouldn't, this is too much. I do 3x for tips. I tell people a cute story. I don't..." He gestured at the door like it was an accusation that didn't need words. I wanted to say we should go, but where? To a bar, to a friend's? To the river? The city had shrunk while we weren't looking. "Look," he said. He held up his right hand. His first 3 fingers were nicked. Little shallow cuts like paper cuts, like he'd been sliding his fingers over rough stone. The edges of the cuts were gray with chalk. "I think I scratched myself on the wall earlier," he said, and then said it again like repetition would make it reasonable. "On the wall earlier." "Wash them," I said. I sounded like my grandmother, he did. I set the sage on fire and walked through our apartment, and smoke alarm be damned. I filled it until the air looked underwater. I opened the windows and let the smell roll back and the mosquitoes roll in, and I muttered the nothing prayers I remembered from her kitchen. We put a glass of water by the door. Don't ask me why. We just did. We sat on the floor together like kids hiding from a storm. The candle burned down like it was swallowing itself to get away. He said quietly, "I think I know her." "Who?" I said, though I already knew what he meant. "The woman in the veil," he said. "I think I've seen her before. Not like a person. Like in the way a place looks at you when you've visited too often and overstayed." We looked at the door. Even with the chalk and the word and the dumb little cup of water and the heat and the buzz of the one fly that had come in and refused to leave, that door was still just our door. The cheap fake wood panels, the scuff where a moving box got dragged, the dent from where a neighbor kicked it once when he forgot his key. That made it worse somehow. When the knocking started, it was gentle. It felt kinder than the last time, and that was its own kind of wrong. The knocks came in 3s. The second set lined up exactly with the word. The chalk dust shook just barely. It made a sound like dry sugar sliding. "Don't," I said. "I'm not," he said, but he was standing. He laid his palm flat on the door. He whispered something. Not the word, but the kind of apology you make when you don't know who you wronged or how to say what you mean. Sorry. Didn't mean to. I'm stupid. I get excited. I make a living. I didn't know. He kept talking. The knocks kept coming. The word on the door looked the way a person looks when they lean forward to catch a whisper. It's the closest I can come. The chalk lines looked more drawn. The world narrowed to the space between his palm and the wood, to the thickness of that cheap door, to the wet edge of air pressing under it like a tongue. When the hallway light came on with its cheap pop, he flinched like he'd been caught. I peered through the peephole just to have something to do with my eyes. The hallway was empty. The motion sensor down by the stairs had been tripped by nothing and was coming back to orange. I could see the little taped corner of the sign about rent and the notice about the broken dryer the landlord would never fix. I could see our doormat with its muddy fleur-de-lis. I couldn't see whatever was knocking. He leaned his forehead against the wood like a penitent. The knock stopped. For a second, everything in the building seemed to listen. Somewhere below us, a door closed. Somewhere above us, a TV cough-laughed. My phone buzzed an ad for cheap airfare to places we'd never go. In the middle of all that petty life, somebody on the other side of the door whispered back. I didn't catch the words. I caught the shape. He understood it, though. I saw it hit him. He stepped back so slowly, like the floor had turned to river, and stepping too fast might break the skin of it, and let everything in the apartment fall. What did it say? I asked. He shook his head, hard. He looked younger than me for the first time since I'd met him. He sat down on the floor again and put his hands over his ears like a kid. I said it first, he whispered. I said it first. He called my grandmother's word like it was a friend, and now a friend had come expecting hospitality. We left that night. I grabbed a backpack. He grabbed a jacket. We did a stupid thing. We went to the cemetery. I don't know why. You go back to origin points when you don't understand a thing. You go to where a rope is tied if you want to cut it. The cemetery at night is not a place you go. Not legally. Not if you have sense. The gate was closed. The guard wasn't there. The sky had that bruised look it gets before heat lightning throws itself around for show. I could smell the river stronger here, and the sweet rot of flowers that had been left and forgotten and decided to reclaim themselves. We didn't climb the fence. We just stood with our fingers hooked in it like it was a crib and we were babies. He stared between the bars at the white wall where I knew in daylight there would be 100 small marks grayed by rain and sun. The proof of wishes rubbed out and written again. In the night, the wall looked clean, bone clean. If there were X's, they were sleeping. He put his forehead to the iron and said in English in a voice too small to be in that city, I'm sorry. The lightning didn't flash right then like a bad story. The wind didn't say his name back. Nothing happened. The something had already happened. The something had our address. We slept on the floor of the hotel office, heads on rolled up towels after I told Franny I'd cover her morning shift. The building hummed around us the way old buildings do, and for the first time in days I slept. Maybe because there were 27 other doors between us and ours. Maybe because the little bell over the lobby entrance made a cheery ding whenever a drunk tried to get in, and that sound felt like seeing headlights on a dark road. At 8, after tourists with cameras and coffee clogged the sidewalk like algae, we went back to the apartment. The hallway light was off again. The door was the door. No chalk on it, no water under it. When we went in, the candle was out. The wax hardened like a melted stairway. His 3 finger cuts were scabbed but clean. A cup of water sat by the door, with a bug drowned in it, legs pointing up like broken clock hands. No more knocks. No more smells. He stood in the middle of the room and turned in a slow circle like he was a dog looking for a place to lie down. He laughed. Thin. Careful. See? He said. It was all... And then he stopped talking. He was looking at the wall by the table, where the paint had bubbled in a small patch. In Louisiana, walls bubble like bread. It wasn't that. Not exactly. The paint was puckered like a pucker you get when a sticker has been peeled away and reapplied. In the middle of the bubble, in a child's careful hand, an X. Fresh. I walked closer. It wasn't chalk. It was lighter paint, the negative of something erased. He reached out. I slapped his hand without thinking. He pulled back, wounded in a stupid third-grade way, and made this face like he wasn't sure whether to cry or joke about it, so he did neither. "Maybe we just move out," he said. We didn't have the money to move. He started sleeping at a girl's place on Chartres, a second-floor shotgun with a balcony where the wind had a way of being tricked into feeling cooler than it was. I didn't ask how serious they were. Maybe serious enough to give him a place to pretend nothing had happened. I think I would have done the same. He left a lot of his stuff at ours: shirts, 2 pairs of shoes, a notebook full of scribbles that looked like a child trying to teach itself to write again. All X's linked and leaned. If you squinted, if you were the kind of idiot I was, you could make other letters out of them. The letters no one should say. The building calmed. The hallway smelled like bleach and spilled beer. I started to feel like I'd told myself a story and let it get out of hand in the telling. On a Sunday morning, 2 weeks later, I got a text from D. It was a picture of a plate of pancakes at the Clover on Canal. He wrote, "You up?" I wrote back, "Unfortunately." He wrote, "Later, cemetery?" I started to type no. He wrote, "Last time, I swear." I wrote, "Last time for your hustle or last time you ask?" He wrote, "Last time for the word. Swear." I said I'd go. I told myself it was to keep him from doing something dumb. I told myself a lot of things that day. He was softer at the edges when I met him on Basin. No sleep, not enough food, a little lost, looking like a dog who's chased the same car too long. He had a legit tour wristband on. "Gonna do it right," he said. He meant he'd paid a real guide to let him tag along. The guard nodded at us like you nod at a bad habit you've decided to tolerate until it goes away on its own. The sun scraped everything bare. The vault sweated. The slow talk of a real guide rolled across the stones, names dropping into the air like pennies into a fountain. People took pictures of nothing that would matter to them tomorrow. We hung back. I watched the wall and tried to pretend it was just a wall. A little girl let go of her mother's hand and traced her finger over the old gray of somebody's wish. The mother scolded her without looking up from her phone, then kissed her head without putting the phone down. The little girl smiled at me like I was a cartoon character. When the group moved on, he stood there alone and I stood a little behind, and to the left like a shadow that had stopped keeping up and was catching its breath. He took the chalk out of his pocket and broke it in half like he meant something by it. He tucked the smaller piece behind his ear like a cigarette. He stared at the wall. The wall didn't stare back because walls don't. But in New Orleans, sometimes they listen. He said softly, "To no one, and maybe to her. I won't say it again." He drew nothing. He put the chalk in his pocket and started to turn away. And then from the other side of the wall, not inside it exactly, but from the beyond place it touches, the horn sound came. Soft, like a memory of a horn. Like a boat, passing on a fog day. Big sound made small by distance and time. Nobody in the group reacted. The guide kept talking about brick and lime. The old man next to us wrinkled his nose like the river had turned bad. D looked at me. I shook my head. "Don't." He didn't say it. He kept his hands in his pockets, and his mouth shut and his back straight the way you do when you think. If you look disciplined enough, nothing bad will think to pick you up by the scruff. He stayed that way for a while. He stayed away from our place for longer. I got used to sleeping without listening for a horn inside the pipes. I let myself think it had passed the way a fever breaks. I know better than to say that now. 3 nights ago, I woke to the smell of candles gone cold. Not wax burning, not sweetness. The smell after. A room that had been full of light learning how to be dark again. I got up, dizzy. The clock on the stove blinked 12 like it was just born. The apartment door was closed. No water under it. I pressed my hand to it anyway. It was cool and there was a little grit on the paint like a fine sand. When I pulled my hand back, I had powder on my palm. Not chalk. Salt. I rinsed it off and told myself a thing about superstitions curling back to bite people who feed them. In the morning, I found the cup of water by the door empty, the drowned bug gone, the glass dry. That afternoon, the hotel got one of those calls where nobody speaks and nobody hangs up and you say, "Hotel Bienville, can I help you?" 5 times. On the 5th time, in the static, I heard the little feather sound of a word you can't say. Not the whole thing, just the start, like a mouth opening. I went by the girl's place on Chartres before my shift. Her roommate answered the door barefoot, mascara under her eyes like bruise petals. "He's not here," she said before I asked. "Hasn't been. Didn't leave a note, you're not the only one looking." I called. His phone went to voicemail. I walked by the cemetery, which is useless, which is exactly what you do. The guard I know shook his head slow in that human way that means a thing is probably bad, but it hasn't learned how to say it yet, and you don't want to be the first one to teach it. "A boy? The hustler?" he said. "A lot of people disappear for a minute in this city. They usually come back when they need something." I went home to wait for a knock I couldn't handle. I lasted until midnight. Then I did what I told him never to do. I put my ear to the door and whispered, "Please." Not the calling word, the one you use when you admit you can't fix a thing. There was no knock. There was the sound the river makes when it's not being watched. There was the small dry slide of chalk. I opened the door. There was nothing in the hall but a dampness like someone had breathed on the paint and stepped back, down by the floor, where my eyes wouldn't have checked if I hadn't bent like I was praying. There were 5 X's, fresh, small, child-high. I wiped them with my sleeve and went to bed like a man who just made a map he didn't want to walk. This morning I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of a door that looked a lot like ours, poorly painted and old. The door was covered in X's like a flock of small birds had crashed into it and left their shapes behind. The X's leaned into each other until they made a word. The word wasn't Revien's. It was his name, Daniel. The message said, "Debt paid." Then the number went dead when I called it. I'm writing this because I made a promise in a hot kitchen a long time ago, and promises are the last currency I trust. Tour guides still tell their groups not to mark the tomb. Most people listen until the story gets good and their hands get itchy. Maybe this is my boring warning to add to that chorus. Or maybe I'm making my own theater because I need to say it somewhere out loud. If you go to St. Louis number 1, listen when they tell you to keep your chalk in your pocket. If someone offers you a shortcut to luck, remember what shortcuts do. They cut something. If a hustler grins at you and says, "Make a wish, leave a tip," you can tip him without drawing anything. You can wish inside your head where it's harder to rewrite. And if you ever find yourself at your own door at night with the smell of old candles and river mud trying to come in with you, don't say the word my grandmother told me not to say. Don't say anything at all. Sometimes the city hears you even when you whisper. Sometimes it hears you when you only think. Sometimes it comes to collect in a language you don't speak. With letters you thought were just chalk lines rubbed into a joke you tell for cash. If you see a man named Daniel Dugas, tell him there's a cup of water waiting and a light if he needs to come sit a while and remember how to be a person again. Tell him I didn't erase the X on the wall by the table, the one that was lighter than paint. I left it there in case the story needs a door. He'll know what I mean. And if you're in the quarter late tonight and you hear a horn where a horn shouldn't be, don't follow it. Let it pass. Let it be a boat going somewhere the map doesn't show anymore. Let it take what's owed without making change. I'm working the desk till dawn. The bell over the lobby door makes that cheerful ding. There's a paper cup of coffee getting cold next to me, and a Saint candle on the shelf we're not supposed to light because of the insurance policy. I keep it unlit. I keep it there anyway. The phone rings the way phones do, and sometimes it's just somebody from out of state asking if we're walking distance to Bourbon, and sometimes there's that hush in the line like a hand over a mouth. If it's him, if he's on a payphone somewhere people ignore payphones, I hope he says anything but the word we both know. The hallway outside my apartment is probably quiet now. The door probably looks like any door. I'm not going to check. I don't want to see whether it's learned how to spell me too. I'll keep my promise. I'll wait. I'll leave the chalk where it belongs, in other people's pockets and under rain, and in the lines of stories I won't tell to make money. You can think what you want about all this. Most people do, until it's their turn to smell the river inside their own walls. Then every letter looks like an X, and every X looks like it's leaning into a word you promised you'd never say. I don't care if anyone believes me. I'm a small-time creator who does quiet history videos on TikTok and YouTube. Cemeteries, old main streets, antique stores, stuff people can fall asleep to. No jump scares, no ghost boxes, no EMF apps. I'm careful about that. I don't want to be the kind of person who turns grief into content. But this happened in Salem last fall at the old burying point, and it hasn't left me alone. I need to put it somewhere that isn't my head. For context, it was late October, the kind of cold you don't notice until you stop walking. A friend of mine, Jess, had a conference in Boston, and I tagged along to film a few reels in nearby towns. Our plan was harmless: coffee, bookstores, leaf peeping, a day trip to Salem because everyone does in October. I thrifted a pair of old brass lanterns from a place in Somerville called The Keep, the kind that take tea lights because it's easier to get nice light on camera than with a phone flashlight. The owner wrapped them in newspaper and said, "Be respectful up there, okay?" I said, of course. We got to Salem in the morning, did the tourist loop, the witch museum outside, not the show, the line was insane, and then drifted over to Charter Street. The old burying point is small, smaller than it looks in photos. It sits there like a tilted book left in the rain, stones leaning every which way, names eaten by lichen and weather. There were tourists, of course, and a couple of volunteers in lanyards who asked folks not to touch the stones. Jess peeled off to a bookstore. I walked the paths, keeping to the gravel, holding one lantern in my left hand and my camera in my right, because that soft candle flicker on slate looks beautiful. I didn't have a script. I almost never do. I find something small and talk around it. The curve of an S in a name, a symbol carved into the top, a date that makes me blink. I try not to mention the trials unless a marker makes me. People know the headlines. What they don't know are the ordinary lives that start and stop in these places. I think that's what comforts me. How normal most of it was. I picked a stone near the center because the light was good and the name, something like Mary or Mercy, I honestly don't think it matters now, was still legible. I set up the shot. I framed the lantern to one side so the flame wasn't dead on, so it would kiss the letters and pull that lemony gold out of the groove. I started talking. I think I said something dumb like, "Okay, Salem, be nice to us. We come in peace," because I was nervous and trying to keep it light. I made a little joke about witches I immediately regretted. Something like, "No spells, okay?" It wasn't mean, but it was tone deaf, and I heard it as I said it. I shot for maybe a minute. Just a quiet pan and a few sentences about the stone, about how different the lettering looked before machine-carved fonts. People walked behind me. I stepped aside for a family so their kids could see. I heard the clack of a tour guide's stick as she pointed to a nearby marker and said the word 1692 in that practiced tone. Normal cemetery noise, here's where things changed. The flame in my lantern reeled to the side. It didn't flicker, it bent. Like someone blew hard from the left, only there wasn't any wind. The trees were still. My hair didn't move. The wick tilted and stayed like that, unnatural, like a compass needle finding a wrong north. And then my audio filled with apologies, stacked apologies, overlapping. Like people talking in a hallway and you're walking through them, picking out sorry and forgive me, and I didn't mean, in a dozen different voices and ages. Male, female, a kid maybe, breathless whispered. Some of them more like the end of a word than the whole thing. One was so clear I took my phone from the gimbal and checked if I had a podcast playing in the background. I didn't. The apologies stopped when I moved my thumb, like the action of breaking the frame cut them off. I stood there with my lantern cocked and my phone warm in my hand and felt embarrassed. Like I had walked into a room where someone was crying and I'd made it about me. I closed the camera app, reopened it, and tried again. No apologies this time. Just the sound of my breathing in a car far away. The flame straightened. I chalked it up to city noise in my own head, picking out patterns. Jess texted that she found a book on local epitaphs and was heading over. I told her where I was and shot a B-roll close-up. Back at the hotel, I scrubbed the footage. The apologies were there in the waveform, like dense hair combed by static. When I dropped the clip into my timeline and soloed the audio, I could hear them even better. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't, what, forgive me. I'm so..." Fading into hiss. My stomach went weird. I've edited in coffee shops, on trains, at my desk at midnight, and I have never once felt like my computer was a person looking back. But that night, the little eye of the camera on my laptop felt aware. I told myself, okay, it's people. There were so many people around and sound bounces. and the cemetery is open on the sides, and you caught 30 different conversations, and your brain is gluing it together around the word sorry because you're primed for it. I decided to pull the clip anyway. I'm allowed to choose. I can choose not to use something that feels wrong. I highlighted that portion of the timeline and deleted it. Only one frame stayed. A single frame like an eyelash stuck to your cheek. The rest of the clip slotted out, and there it was, exactly one frame long if you zoomed in enough. Me holding the lantern, my face at that awful in-between expression, my mouth partway through shaping a word. But it wasn't the way I shot it. The angle was lower, like the camera had been set on the ground and pointed up. And the stone behind me, Mary Mercy, the one I started with, did not say Mary anymore. It said my name, not handwritten, cut. The same worn-out serif, the same shallow groove that catches light. My first and last name, as if someone had sanded and re-chiseled it 2 centuries late. No death date, just the dash. I stared until my eyes watered. I zoomed in and out. I checked the original clip on the SD card and the cloud backup. Every version had the frame. I tried to delete it again. The frame twitched the tiniest bit like a badly compressed GIF, then slid back into place. I told Jess. She's used to me spiraling over weird glitches, so she rolled her chair over with that, "We will solve this" face. She's the opposite of me. Science teacher, practical, collects vintage knives because she likes the mechanics, not the spooky history. She watched, paused, backed up, scrubbed forward. "It's compression," she said at first. Then, "That's a weird artifact." Then she stopped talking. "You see my name," I said. "I see letters," she said, not looking at me. "Do you have a plugin that does text something?" "No." We sat there in the kind of silence that has shape. I laughed because that's what my body does when I'm out of road. "It's a stupid prank I pulled on myself," I said. "I must have masked something and forgot." Jess reached out and closed the laptop. "Let's sleep," she said. "You'll look in the morning and it'll be boring." I woke up at 4 to a smell like wet ashes. Not cigarette. Not a fireplace. That smell when you dump a fire and it goes out but stays warm for hours, damp and gray. I checked the bathroom. I checked the vents. I checked the hallway, which was empty. The smell was stronger near my backpack where I'd put the thrifted lanterns, nested together mouth to mouth like little bells. The metal was cold. I took them into the bathroom and rinsed them because maybe some soot had shaken loose. The water ran clear. The next morning we went back. I thought, if I put my feet exactly where I put them before, if I apologize out loud, if I film again and say I'm sorry and I mean it, something will ease. That's ridiculous, I know. But I also know we talk to spaces and sometimes they talk back. The cemetery looked normal. The volunteers were there. A school group came through, trying not to step on buried roots. A cop walked by outside, slow as if waiting for his shift to end. I found the stone I used, the exact one. There's a chip like a bite on the right edge, and it said Mary again, or Mercy or Margaret. Not me, not any part of me. I felt stupid in the best way. Giddy with being wrong, I took the same shot. I did not joke. I said quietly, "I'm sorry," into my audio and into my chest. A man nearby side-eyed me and moved along. I filmed the family stones around it, the little lamb shapes, the slate hearts, the carved skulls with wings. The lantern flame behaved like normal fire. The wind was real wind. Jess wandered the path and pointed out a stone with the carver's mark, a little swan in the corner. We stayed an hour, then got sandwiches and drove back to Boston in traffic that made me want to gnaw the steering wheel. My phone buzzed the whole time like it wanted to say something. That afternoon in the hotel, I pulled the new footage. No apologies. My voice cars, the tour guide hitting 1692 like a bell. I dropped the clip next to last night's. There it was. One frame, same angle from below that I didn't shoot. Only now the name on the stone behind me wasn't mine. It was Jess's. I didn't say anything. I scrolled in so close the pixels looked like a field. First and last. No date, the dash. I saved the project and closed it like you close a door when you know someone's behind it. Jess was lying on the bed reading her book of epitaphs. She didn't look up when I said her name. "What?" she said. "Do you want to go for a walk?" "I'm comfy." I sat down in the desk chair. The air smelled like that ash again, but lighter. Like someone had opened a window in a room where a candle had just been blown out. I told myself I was still inside a glitch. But I can hold two ideas at once. that there's a technical explanation and that it doesn't matter because the message is the same. I didn't film anything else in Salem. We went home. I ignored my footage for a week. When I finally opened it, I did the stupid thing where you try to work around the bad spot, like skipping a step that creaks. I cut new videos from other trips, covered bridges in New Hampshire, a ferry graveyard in New Jersey. They're on my channel now, and you can tell when the Salem thing sits behind them like a darker color coming through paint. But I had to know if this frame was stuck to me, I guess, so I took the lanterns to my hometown cemetery. Our dead aren't famous. They're mostly old farmers and kids who didn't make it. I filmed in daylight with the wind high. The lanterns looked pretty and silly in the sun. A volunteer I know waved and told me her knees hurt. Everything was normal. I pulled the footage that night. There was a frame. One frame that wasn't mine. Low angle. Me making the same mid-syllable face, the same slant of light. The stone behind me had Jess's last name still, but not her first. It had my brother's first name. My brother is alive. He is a good dad and a good person. I closed the laptop so fast my thumbnail bent back. I took the lanterns apart and bought new tea lights and set the brass pieces on different shelves like that would dilute them. I stopped carrying them in my bag. That helped the smell. It didn't help the audio. The next time I recorded voiceover, I kept getting that stack of apologies under my voice like a harmony no one asked for. I could minimize them with noise reduction. I could remove them entirely by sitting in my closet with a blanket over my head, like a kid with a flashlight. But if I recorded near a window or a door or anything that feels like an opening, and I said a name out loud, any name, a second later there it would come, soft and layered. Sorry. Forgive me. I didn't mean... I told myself I was listening for it. I told myself it was the sound of tires on wet asphalt. I told myself to get a life. In December, a message came to my Instagram from a woman I didn't know. "This is weird," she wrote in. "But when I paused your Salem short, I saw my aunt's name on a stone behind you, and she isn't dead." It was only for a second. Is that a TikTok thing? I didn't answer. I watched her message sit there like a thumbprint. 2 days later, a man DM'd to say, "Crazy. When you turn with the lantern, my name is behind you. Thought it was an ARG. What's it promoting?" I blocked him. I turned off comments on the Salem short and then turned them back on because that felt like confessing guilt where I didn't know what the crime was. And this is where I have to stop, pretending there's a pattern I can push into shape. Nothing happened to my brother. Jess is fine. I am fine. Everyone who wrote to me, as far as I know, is fine. The cemetery in Salem continues to be a place where people are buried and other people walk by. The volunteers continue to say, "Don't touch." Tour guides still hit 1692 like a bell. The apology noise comes and goes, except 3 things, and then I'm done. The first is small. In January, I set the lanterns on a high shelf and forgot them. One night, my neighbor burned something and the hallway filled with smoke. We all went out in slippers. The alarms were shrieking. The neighbor was crying and saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," over and over. When the firemen let us back in, my apartment smelled like that ash again, only this time I knew it wasn't the hallway. I walked around because that's what you do. You prove to yourself that you control your space. In the bedroom, in the dark, I saw the faintest lick of light on the wall, like the ghost of a candle flicker. It was steady. It was the color of the lantern flame. When I turned on the light, nothing was there. The second is ugly. In February, an older man emailed me through my site with a screenshot. It's my Salem video, the part where I'm joking about witches, which I kept because I didn't want to pretend I hadn't said it. In his screenshot, if you zoom in on the stone behind me, tiny as an eyelash, is a last name I recognized from the news. A local scandal. A person who had apologized a lot and in public. He asked if I did the edit after it broke. He asked if I was trying to be cute. I wrote back and said, "No edits." He sent me a thumbs up emoji. That should have been the end of it. But I went to the article and watched a video of that man apologizing into microphones. If you put your finger over his mouth and just watch his eyes, he looks like he's reading names off a list he can't stop. The third thing is the one that gets me up at night. I told you I keep my audio recordings in folders by date. I keep backups in 2 places. I keep a spreadsheet. I am organized because I have to be. 3 weeks ago, I opened my voiceover folder to pull a line I liked from a different project, and one file had a name I didn't give it. It was a date. The date was April 16th, 2026. That's in the future. I opened it. It's me. I can hear my mouth movements, the click of saliva between words, the way your tongue makes a little thud against your teeth before a T. I'm saying, "I'm sorry" over and over in different intonations, sarcastic, genuine, tired, just awake, close to crying. Then the apologies start to layer, not like it's me tracing myself, but like I'm one person in a crowd. A kid says, sorry, quickly, like he's handing a thing back. A woman says, "Forgive me," in a voice like a room with curtains. A man says, "I didn't mean," and you never hear what he didn't mean. The file is a minute long. At the end, just before the click of a stop, there's a breath that isn't mine, and a whisper that is too fast to be understandable. When I slow it, it's still too fast. When I slow it more, it sounds like a word trying to catch up to itself. It sounds like my name. I deleted the file. It reappeared. It isn't funny to say that. It sounds like the part where you stop taking someone seriously and start suggesting hobbies or therapy. But that's what happened. I deleted it again, and this time it stayed gone from the folder. I emptied the trash. I walked my dog. I went to bed, and when I woke up the next day and opened my laptop because I couldn't not, the file wasn't in voiceover. It was a single frame in my editing timeline, too small to see. A sliver let in when you close an eye against sun. This is the part where I try to tie it up. I can't. I could say, "Don't joke where you don't mean it." I could say, "Be careful with names, even your own." I could say, "I don't think anything wants to hurt me. I think it wants me to hold something for a second, and I'm not strong enough to keep holding it without bending shape." But that sounds like a moral, and I don't have one. Here is what I know, and it's ordinary and terrifying. People say sorry all the time. For bumping shoulders, for breaking promises, for making a mess, for making a life. Cemeteries hold the echo. Some of those apologies don't end when a mouth does. They go somewhere. Maybe it's into stone, maybe it's onto tape, maybe it's the air trying not to choke on our breath. When I scrub through that Salem project now, not often, not daily, but on the days when I think maybe I made it all up, I find a spot where the playhead sticks for half a second. If I take a screenshot at exactly that moment and zoom way in until the pixels are separate squares, I can make out a name on the stone behind me. It isn't mine, it isn't Jess's, it isn't my brother's, it's a username. It's one of yours. The date next to the dash is empty. I don't know if that means what you think it means. It could be a trick of the compression. It could be my brain, greedy for patterns. It could be nothing. I'm posting this because I can't keep something that might be a warning all to myself. If you watch that video, and you will because curiosity is a little door we never stop opening, pause carefully. Look at the stones the way you'd look into a mirror in a dark room. If you see your name, don't tell me. I am sorry. I don't know what for, and I don't think the people who whispered at me knew either, not really. I think they just needed to say it, and I was there with a lantern and a mic, making jokes in a place where the air already knows how to listen. I didn't burn the lanterns. They're brass. They don't want to die by fire. I put them back on the high shelf that first week, and I haven't touched them since. Sometimes at night, the flame in the frame reels sideways in my head and lines up with a wind I can't feel. I wait to hear apologies, but the apartment is quiet, and somewhere down the block someone is laughing, and it sounds like a breath you hold until your chest has to give. On my desk, under my hand, the trackpad warms like a pulse. If you go to Salem, be gentle. Don't touch the stones. Don't step where the ground is thin. Don't ask the past to put on a show. If you film, keep your jokes for the living. And if a single frame won't delete, if a name you know looks back at you in the old lettering, leave it where it is. Let it be a door that stays closed. Some things are sorry. Some things are only the echo. And some things I'm starting to think are the dash. I'm not looking for attention. I just need someone to tell me I didn't pull this whole thing out of stress and bad sleep. I'm posting from a throwaway because I don't want the people in my life to connect this with me, and because one of them asked me to stop talking about it. If anyone here is from the south side of Chicago or knows Cook County folklore, you're already thinking the same place I'm thinking, Bachelor's Grove. I'd heard the stories for years. Floating blue lights, a woman in white, a fisherman who pulled up bones in the old canal. My uncle used to say the cemetery didn't scare him. It was the woods around it. The way the trees knit together and the mud holds onto footprints like it remembers you. I never believed any of it more than you believe any old campfire story. But this past summer I got into urban exploration with my friend Danny. We never forced entry or broke locks. We followed trails, took photos, left things how we found them. That was the rule. She's the kind of person who keeps her hiking boots in her trunk just in case. I'm the kind of person who recharges batteries the night before, even if they're already at 90%. We made a decent team. We went to Bachelor's Grove on a Sunday in late August, early evening. It wasn't quite dark, but the woods there always feel like the dim corner of a room. I remember the humidity because it clung to the inside of my elbows and made my shirt stick to my back. Mosquitoes hummed like static. We parked by the trailhead off the Midlothian Turnpike. 2 other cars were there. One guy was walking a pit mix and a couple were coming out with tripods and a camera. Danny gave the couple a nod. They gave us that quick smile you trade when you both know you're here to chase the same weird hobby. "You still want to do this?" Danny asked, teasing. Because we'd bailed on a different spot the week before after hearing voices that turned out to be teenagers. "Yeah," I said, just to see it. In daylight, we passed the sign. The path narrowed and then widened near the creek. The old quarry pond, they say, is bottomless, even though that makes no sense. Bachelor's Grove itself is fenced off, but there are openings and the fence leans like tired shoulders. The stones are old and sunken, some are spray-painted or knocked over. Someone had left a little stuffed rabbit on one slab, and it had absorbed enough rain to look heavy with sorrow. I took a few photos, mostly to get my settings right. The light filtered through the canopy in long, soft stripes. Danny said, "Okay, farmhouse." I'd heard about the phantom farmhouse as a punchline, like the cemetery's own urban legend had an urban legend. People say it shows up and disappears, and if you turn away and look back, it looks closer. Someone on YouTube had done a jittery night vision video where they claimed a white shape moved behind a tree. The thing about the woods south of the cemetery is that they're thick, and there are old foundations and trash out there. If you want to see a house, you can find one in the tilt of a stone or a seam of light. I wanted to roll my eyes. I didn't. We crossed the fence where it dipped and followed a faint path through buckthorn and fallen branches. Somewhere to our left, a car went by on the road, then another, then silence again. We didn't talk much. It's strange how quickly your voice sounds wrong in a place like that. My boots squelched in a patch of black mud and came out with a sucking sound. Danny walked ahead, and every time she stopped, the insects filled in the space between us. The first time we saw it, I thought it was a trick of the light, just pale boards or a tarp hung up by someone. The shape was simple and far away, framed by 2 maples, a smudge of angles and shadow that could be anything. We stood a long minute, not because it was terrifying, but because you don't want to say that's it and find out your brain is making it up. "Do you see?" Danny started. "Yeah," I said, even though I wasn't sure what I saw. I blinked. The pale shape steadied like a ship docking. We took a few steps forward. The air cooled. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt like walking from the kitchen into a basement. Danny exhaled and laughed this small laugh, like she'd expected the punchline to arrive, and it didn't. We took more steps. I lifted my camera, focused, unfocused, tried again. Through the lens, it looked wrong. Not fake, just like the autofocus kept choosing the air 2 inches in front of the thing. I took a shot anyway. The shutter sounded too loud. We blinked. It was closer. Neither of us said that out loud. It would have made it real. We moved forward and the shade pooled around our ankles. I felt the exact moment the woods went quiet. A vacuum where crickets had been. There was the sound of one car a long way off and then nothing except our breath and the whisper of a breeze high up. The pale shape had edges. A roofline. A porch with collapsed steps. Windows like eyes someone had painted shut. Danny touched my arm and the sweat there made our skin stick a second. She pointed. The trees didn't frame the place anymore. They bracketed it like it had always sat there and we were the ones moving through it. "It looks solid," she said, like she was apologizing to physics. I looked down to check my footing and saw what I hated. Shoe prints in the mud we hadn't made. The tread pattern was different. Smaller, flatter like dress shoes or old boots. They were crisp and shallow, not filled with water. Next to them were narrow tracks like something heavy had been dragged by 2 people. In identical lines, they led toward the house and faded where the ground turned dry. "We're not the first," I said, and my voice sounded like it was practicing. Danny took the lead. I followed because that's what you do. If you've ever been in a place your brain tells you shouldn't exist, you know the movement you make is small and careful, like you're trying not to wake a child you just got to sleep. We came up on the side of the house where brambles had pulled the siding into ribbons. The air smelled like wet plaster and old leaves. The porch sat a foot off the ground, paneling missing in one section. Your brain does checklists in moments like that. Nails, rot, snakes, bees. We still put our weight on the first step. It held. The second step cried like a door hinge. The third flexed and I felt the sound more than heard it. Danny reached the porch and looked at me like we were about to do something we'd laugh about over cheap tacos later. We each had our phone flashlights, but neither of us turned them on. We pushed open the front door like it had been pushed open 1,000 times because it had. Inside, a room with a fireplace mantel and a floor that sagged in the middle. Wallpaper had peeled in long curls, exposing plaster scored with old lath. The light came through the trees in flat squares. We didn't go far. There was a frame over the mantel. Not a mirror, a photo. Old and under glass, but not too old. The kind of studio portrait you used to get at the mall in the 90s. Except the clothing wasn't 90s. It was older, early 20th century or even late 19th. 7 people arranged in the formal, uncomfortable way those pictures always show. 2 adults seated, 5 standing behind. The faces were not clear. Not blurred like the camera had moved. Faded. Like the emulsion on that part of the photo had been washed away, except for 2 spots down front where the seated adults' heads would have been. There, instead of faces, there were clean blank ovals, the size of 2 adult heads, the exact size and placement of where Danny and I would stand if we took a picture in front of the fireplace. I laughed. It came out like a cough. Somebody's idea of a joke, I said. Like a prop. Danny didn't laugh. She looked at the edges of the frame the way it hung, the tiny nails that held the backing in place. Who would bring this out here? Why? Same reason anyone brings anything out here, I said. For people like us, her eyes changed. I don't know how else to say it. Not fear from a movie. More like a math problem you realize you did wrong 3 steps ago. Look, she said, and pointed at the ashes in the fireplace. They weren't untouched. Someone had stirred them recently, leaving a spiral with a fingertip or a stick. In the gray were darker flecks like the wax from a candle had burned there, pooled and hardened and then been turned under. Beside the hearth on the floor, a series of scuffs made a half circle as if someone had stood there and turned and turned. There were other things too. A child's toy, a red plastic ring from a stacking set that didn't fit the age of the house, a beer can sun-bleached to a ghost of its brand, a little pile of rocks on the windowsill arranged tallest to shortest, the kind of stack you make when you're nervous and need your hands to be busy. I didn't want to give any of it meaning, but my brain tried. Take a picture, Danny said. She didn't say please. She didn't say of what. I lifted the camera and took 3 of the mantle in the photo. My hands shook, not from fear, but from how hard I was trying not to. From somewhere deep in the house, something tapped. If you've ever been in an old building, you know the sound of wood cooling. The tick-tick as it adjusts. It wasn't that. It was deliberate, too evenly spaced to be random. 3 taps, a pause. 3 more. The pattern used to get my attention in school when I zoned out. Danny looked at me like she had the exactly same memory. We both listened, and without meaning to, we both glanced at the photo again like it could explain anything. It had changed. I don't have another way to put it that doesn't sound like a lie. It had changed, and also it hadn't. The 5 faded faces in the back were still washed out. But the blank ovals were not entirely blank. The left one, a shape you could interpret as an ear or a jawline if you wanted. The right one, the suggestion of hair. The rest looked like someone had breathed on a window and held their face there long enough to leave a fog print. Danny broke the spell by doing something normal. She stepped sideways and jostled me with her shoulder and said, "Okay, I hate that." And then she took her phone out and angled it. Before she could snap, the tapping came again, closer. Not deep in the house, above us. Directly above us, the way a person would walk across a second-floor landing if they were trying to be quiet and failing. The ceiling trembled dust down in a soft curtain. The steps, because that's what they had become, stopped above the doorway and didn't move. "Hey," Danny said, and it wasn't to me. "Hello? We're just taking pictures. We didn't break anything." Her voice went up at the end like the offer might be accepted. The steps went away. Not toward us, not deeper into the house, but sideways, like someone had turned and slid their weight along the edge of the upstairs floor. There was a sound like fingers in the walls. We hadn't seen stairs anywhere. The way the first room was arranged, they had to be behind the wall to the right wherever the hallway went. I decided I had seen enough. "We should go," I said. We got what we came for, and I'm not explaining to a cop why we're in a house that doesn't exist. Danny nodded. She took one photo, just one, of the mantle and the portrait, like a person who knows they'll regret it if they don't. Then we eased back onto the porch. I told myself the air would feel different once we were outside, and I was right. It felt flat and hot again. Cicadas resumed. The trees took up their normal places. We climbed down the stairs in the reverse order we'd gone up. I half expected the porch to collapse and trap us like a joke the place would tell later, but it held. We walked away fast enough to feel silly, then slowed because we didn't want to look like we were running from anything. I kept my camera up, shooting over my shoulder with the lazy confidence of someone who'd delete half of it later. The house shrank behind us. We blinked. It didn't get farther away. I stopped. Danny didn't, then she did, a yard ahead. We turned back together. The house sat at the same size and angle it had when we were at the porch. I took 2 steps backward, the way you test a curb. The house didn't recede. Danny whispered, "No, not to me." To the math, we broke then. We didn't sprint, but we finally dropped the part of us that was trying to be cool. We walked with purpose. The woods objected, branches snagging our sleeves, wet ground pulling at our boots. We reached the fence and stepped through the dip like we were deflating into normal. When we turned, finally the house was gone. No pale shape, no angles. Just the trees. If you've ever pulled your hand away from something hot and then convinced yourself you hadn't touched it at all, you know the feeling. Back at the main path near the cemetery, we ran into a man with a reflective vest and a canvas bag over his shoulder. Later, I'd tell myself he was a volunteer or with the forest preserves. He had a clipboard. He gave us a professional smile. "You folks take the south path?" he asked. His eyes flicked to our boots. Mud up to the laces. Leaves stuck like fish scales. "Yeah," Danny said. "Just for a minute. Best to stick to the trail," he said. Not a reprimand. Advice. He handed us a card with a number on it and the Cook County seal. "If you see anyone dumping or poaching or messing with the stones, call that. Makes it easier for everyone." He glanced into the trees like he knew we were looking at the place where the house should be. "Even if it's not what you think it is," he added. "Especially then." And he kept walking, his bag knocking against his hip. We didn't say much on the way back to the car. On the ride home, we did the verbally agreed upon rationalizing you do after something strange. The human brain is suggestible. Light does weird things through leaves. The house was some old hunter's blind that someone had dressed up to spook tourists. By the time I dropped Danny off, we had almost convinced ourselves. We promised to compare photos later and not hype each other up. She hugged me longer than usual. She isn't a long hug person. "Let's not do any more houses for a while," she said and laughed. At home, I plugged the camera into my laptop. The raw files loaded. I clicked fast through the cemetery shots, tilted stones, the stuffed rabbit, Danny's hair catching late sun. Then the woods, the first pale suggestion, the angle where the porch appeared, the mantle, the portrait. In the first picture, the 2 blank ovals were ovals. In the second, there were soft suggestions. In the third, you could have told yourself you saw Danny's cheekbone, my hairline. In the fourth, taken on the porch with my jittery hands, the 2 blanks had detail. Not perfectly, not like a normal photo, but enough for recognition if you were looking for it. The curve of Danny's smile she uses when she's nervous. My stupid cowlick. I told myself I was projecting. I toggled back and forth between that one and the first mantle shot. You know that old illusion where the dress is blue or gold depending on who you are? It felt like that. If I wanted to see us, I saw us. If I wanted to see old damage, I saw old damage. Then I opened the last photo, the one Danny took with her phone right before we left. It was of the mantle straight on, no flash. The room behind her and my shoulder in the corner like a proof of life. The 7 figures were in the frame. The 5 faded faces were still washed out. The 2 blanks were not blank. She hadn't used portrait mode. There was no AI fill. It wasn't even a live photo. But in those 2 ovals, the features were unmistakable. The details weren't perfect, like someone had traced them from memory, like a face reconstructed from a description rather than from life. But it was us. Not just my hairline. My cheap black baseball cap, the one I'd worn backward that day because sweat made it itchy against my forehead. Danny's cross pendant with the nick in the left arm from when she dropped it in a parking lot last year. The background of the portrait had changed too, in the way you notice in your peripheral vision and then can't unsee. The wallpaper pattern behind the 7 people matched the curls peeling off the walls in the room we were standing in. I sat there trying to invent a trick. Maybe someone had superimposed our old Instagram photos into this as a viral thing. Maybe there was a face recognition meme I didn't know about. I checked the XEF, nothing weird. I zoomed in and out until the pixels broke up and reassembled. I texted Danny one word, "Come." She didn't respond. I called. It rang once and went to voicemail. I left a stupid babble. She called back an hour later. Her voice was bright and too even. "Hey, I'm fine, sorry, my phone died for a little and I just need to shower and sleep. Can we look at everything tomorrow?" She didn't wait for me to answer before she hung up. The next morning, I woke up to 5 messages from an unknown number. They were all pictures. Different angles of the woods. The fence, the path. In each, just visible, there was the white shape of the house. The kind of artifact you can tell yourself is the sun. In the third, the shape was larger. The way things get larger when you step closer. In the 5th, the porch filled the frame. In the corner of the last one, down by the missing panel near the porch, you could see a flash of red plastic like a toy ring. The number wasn't Danny's. I dialed it and immediately hung up because what would I say? I texted back, "Who is this?" No reply. I drove to Danny's. Her car was there. She wasn't. Her neighbor, a woman who smokes on her stoop in a robe, told me Danny had left early with a backpack. Said she forgot something, the neighbor said, ashing with one practiced flick. You know how it is when a bug gets into your brain? She said it like a compliment and a warning. Hey, do you know why she had mud up on her calves like that? It's barely rained. I went back that afternoon because I am either brave or stupid, depending on who you ask. I parked in the same spot and texted Danny again, then sent her a screenshot of the portrait. The woods felt normal from the parking lot. People were there, a family with 2 kids, a guy on a run. But as soon as I passed the sign and the shade swallowed the sun's edges, that basement sensation returned. At the fence, I saw movement down the south path and my stomach dropped, then unknotted. It was the reflective vest man from the day before. He looked up like he'd been waiting. Hey, he said. Back so soon? Have you seen? I started. He held up a hand. If you're looking for your friend, you're the second person who's asked me that today. He didn't make it dramatic. He just looked tired. I told the other guy the same thing I'm about to tell you. It's easy to get turned around. Stay on the marked trail, and if you step off, keep a bead on the sound of the road. And if you see anything that looks like it's in good shape where it shouldn't be, it's not. That's the rule. I must have made a face because he softened it, almost smiling. Look, he said. Sometimes people put things out there. They build... He searched for a word and landed on one that felt both wrong and right. Stages. They build stages and set decorations to scare folks. But sometimes you make your own stage by walking into the one they left. Understand? I didn't, but I said I did. He looked past me, his gaze slipping over my shoulder like he was checking a rear-view mirror. If you hear tapping, he said, it's just wood cooling. If you see a light, it's kids with phones. If you smell smoke, call it in. Then he nodded like the conversation was over and walked away, bag knocking against his hip again. I went anyway. I stayed on the obvious path until it stopped being obvious, and then I kept going. The woods to the south have a way of making you think the same trees are ahead of you no matter how much you walk. I followed a small run of higher ground, stepping over a deadfall. I told myself I wasn't going to the house and that I was just wandering a little. Then the air dropped and felt like a basement again, and I knew I'd lied to myself. I saw it between the trees, nearer with every blink. I stood there 30 feet away, the safe distance you instinctively keep from a stray dog. From a ledge, from a door you don't want to set off. I told myself I'd take one photo and leave. I lifted my phone. Before I could press the shutter, the front door swung inward a few inches and tapped against the wall. Not a slam, not a gust. Tap, like someone had opened it with the part of their hand that hurts less. I don't want to say that I went inside because the story needs me to. I went inside because there was a small thought that if I didn't, it would follow me out anyway. The mantle looked the same. The picture looked the same. That same spiral in the ash. That same half circle of scuffs like someone had turned and turned. A new thing. A small pressed wildflower on the edge of the hearth, bright and out of place. Danny? I said, because saying nothing was worse. The upstairs answered with a single step and then silence. I took one slow breath and stepped to the mantel. The portrait was exactly as it had been in Danny's photo. Me with my dumb backwards cap, Danny with her cross. The other 5 faded almost away. Up close, there was a texture to our features that shouldn't have been there. It looked like the way pencil smears when you rub it with your thumb. I lifted a hand before I could think better. My fingers hovered over the glass. My hand looked wrong, superimposed over the image like a bad green screen composite. The air near the photo was cool. Something tapped at the window behind me. I didn't turn. The tap came again, then again, like a person who knows you're in there and is willing to wait. The third time it had weight. I swallowed and finally pivoted. Outside, just beyond the window, the man with the reflective vest stood in the trees. Not in the yard. In the trees, the way deer stand, half hidden and certain of themselves. He raised his clipboard like a wave. I opened my mouth and he opened his, but there was no sound either way. He lifted his free hand and pointed down, then to his left, then 2 fingers to his eyes. It didn't feel like I'm watching you. It felt like, look where you are standing. I looked. My feet lined up with the scuffed half circle, someone's idea of a mark, the place you stand for the photo. I stepped back so fast the floor protested. The house changed its mind about holding me then. You know how a building sometimes shifts and you can tell every nail and joint is trying to remember where it belongs? The whole place did that, a slow settling, a patient angling. The mantel tilted a fraction and the portrait frame slid, caught, slid again. I reached to stop it from falling without thinking and my fingers brushed the glass. The surface wasn't smooth. It was damp as if someone had breathed on it. For an instant I saw my hand overlaying my own face in the picture. And for an instant my own face looked like someone else's version of me. The way your reflection looks at night when you pass a dark window and it's wrong. I didn't run. I backed out step by slow step until I hit the porch rail with my calf. The door did that soft tap like it was saying this isn't over. This is just a pause. I climbed down and walked away without taking my eyes off the house. Because I had learned the other rule in those woods. Don't give your back to what wants your attention. At the fence, the man in the vest wasn't there. Back at the car, I texted Danny again and again. That night, she posted a photo on her main feed. It wasn't of the house. It was of the cemeteries we'd stopped at months ago. The ones with angel statues and well-maintained grass. Her caption was, "Slow weekend. Good to slow down." People commented with hearts and leaf emojis. I messaged her privately. "Call me." She wrote back one thing. "Stop. We haven't talked about it since." Every so often, late at night, someone unknown texts me a photo of a tree line. Sometimes it's snow-dusted. Sometimes it's thick with summer. Sometimes it's half-oxygen fall. In the middle of each, if you want to see it, there's the pale shape. The house looks like it's in different places. Indiana, Wisconsin, out by Joliet, up by Lake County. But the angle is always the same. Straight on, with the door a little open and the porch ready for weight. If I open the pictures in a dark room, I swear I can smell plankwood and ash. I've tried to block the numbers. New ones appear. Last week, I went to print out a picture from a family wedding on my home printer. The printer made that grinding noise like it's rearranging tiny bones. When the paper came out, it was my niece and my mom and my aunt all smiling. In the corner, reflected in the glass of the frame behind them, was a mantle and a picture and a suggestion. It could be anything. It could be nothing. I threw the print away and then dug it out and looked again and then threw it away harder. If I'm posting this here, it's because you all understand the way the world sometimes feels like it has seams, and every once in a while you can put your fingers in them if you're not careful. I can't prove any of it. I can't prove the man with the vest even worked for anyone. When I called the number on the card he gave us, it was real. Cook County Forest Preserves. The woman who answered said they don't do individual volunteers with clipboards during ungated hours. She didn't say I imagined him. She didn't say I didn't. She said, "If you think someone has been building structures out there, be careful. Sometimes people get territorial. I haven't gone back. Danny doesn't want to. She told me after a week of nothing that it would be better if we let it go. You can feed these things," she said over text. "Let's not." I said okay because she asked me to. That was a month ago. 2 nights ago, she sent one message at 3:11 a.m. that just said, "Door." When I wrote back immediately, she didn't answer. Her last posted photo was a sunset over the lake with her shoes in the frame, and a caption about needing to touch grass. I know this reads like I'm trying to scare you. I'm not. I am telling you what happened and what keeps happening. If you go out there and you see anything that looks like it's in good shape where it shouldn't be, it's not. If you see a house that isn't on any map, don't go check. Leave it alone. You think you will win because you have a phone and GPS and a strong opinion about what is real. The house doesn't care about any of that. And if you're like me and you have a picture on your phone of a mantle with a portrait and 7 people where 5 are faded and 2 look a little like you and the person you went there with, don't touch the glass. Don't stand on the scuffed half circle. Don't wait for the tapping to start. If you've already done all that, I don't have advice. All I have is this weird, useless piece of information that everyone from around there already knows, the way you know which alleys flood during storms. The phantom farmhouse shows up between the trees, nearer with every blink. It's nearer even now. You don't have to prove it's fake. It isn't asking you to. Sometimes at night I wake up because the house is quiet, the kind of quiet that has a shape. I listen for the 3 taps and I don't hear them, which somehow is worse. I lie still in the dark and think about that portrait above the mantel and the blank spaces waiting, sized exactly for shoulders, as if the negative space had practiced for whoever might arrive. I think about the man with the vest, his clipboard lifted in a wave, asking with his eyes if I was paying attention. I think about Danny's last message, door. I get up and check mine. The air on the other side is cool, like something has been breathing on it for a long time. Very close, waiting for a head to fill a space it has prepared. I keep it closed. I keep it closed. I keep it closed.